This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night at the abandoned house down the street from where I grew up. This was back when I was 16, about 8 years ago, in my hometown of Maplewood. Not a big city, just a quiet suburb where nothing ever happened. 4 houses down from my parents' place on Oak Avenue stood this massive eyesore, a 3-story Victorian that had been empty for as long as I could remember. The paint was peeling off in huge chunks. Half the windows were either cracked or completely broken, and the lawn looked more like a small jungle. The property had been tied up in some kind of estate dispute for years, according to my mom. The owner, some old guy who lived 2 towns over, would come by every few months to board up windows and fix locks after the local kids inevitably broke in. It was like a weird game. He'd secure it, teens would find a way in, he'd come back and patch it up again, rinse and repeat. My friends and I had talked about checking it out for years, but I was always too scared. I'm not usually the adventurous type, but that night was different. It was mid-June, school had just let out for summer, and my 3 friends, Jake, Matt, and Kristen, were hanging out in my basement playing video games when Matt brought it up again. "We should finally check out the old Darby house tonight," he said, not even looking away from the TV screen. "Stop being such babies about it." I don't know if it was boredom or just wanting to prove something, but for once, I didn't immediately say no. Before I knew it, we had all agreed to go at midnight when the neighborhood would be quiet. It started raining lightly around 11:30, which only made the whole thing creepier. We all met in my driveway wearing dark hoodies and carrying flashlights. The walk to the house was only a minute or 2, but it felt much longer as the rain picked up slightly. Standing in front of the place was intimidating. It looked even bigger and more run down up close. 3 stories of decay looming over us. The front porch sagged in the middle, and thick ivy covered most of the right side of the house. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring down at us. Jake tried the front door first, a heavy wooden door with peeling red paint. It was locked, of course. "What now?" Kristen whispered, already looking like she regretted coming. Matt didn't hesitate. He just took a few steps back and kicked the door hard near the lock. There was a splintering sound, but the door held. He kicked again, and this time his foot went straight through the rotting wood, leaving a jagged hole about the size of a basketball. "Holy shit," I hissed. "The owner's going to know someone broke in." "He'll just think it was the usual high school kids," Matt said, already reaching his arm through the hole. "Almost got it." I heard the lock click from inside, and the door creaked open. The smell hit us immediately, musty, like old books left in a damp basement mixed with something else I couldn't identify, something sour. We turned on our flashlights and stepped inside. The entryway was narrow with peeling floral wallpaper and a staircase directly ahead. To the right was what must have been a dining room, and to the left, a small kitchen. Everything felt claustrophobic. Low ceilings, narrow doorways, rooms smaller than they should have been for a house this size. Dust particles danced in our flashlight beams. The floor was littered with debris. Old newspapers, empty beer cans, fast food wrappers. Clearly, we weren't the first visitors. "Let's go upstairs," Jake whispered, already heading toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked horribly under our weight. I was sure one would give way, but we made it to the 2nd floor, where we found what must have been the living room. There was an old couch against one wall, covered in dark spots that looked like mold. "I'm not sitting on that," Kristen said, shining her light on the couch. "Instead, We all sat in a circle on the hardwood floor. The rain was coming down harder now, pattering against the windows. Matt pulled out 4 beers from his backpack, and we each took one, though I barely sipped mine. My heart was racing too much to drink. We talked in hushed voices about the house's history, all rumors we'd heard growing up, that a family had been murdered here in the 70s, that the last owner had gone insane and died inside. None of it was true, but sitting in that dark, damp room, it was easy to believe. About 20 minutes in, we heard it, a creaking sound from downstairs, like weight on old floorboards. We all froze mid-conversation. "What was that?" Kristen whispered. "Probably just the house settling," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Then came a loud bang from below, not like something falling, but like something being knocked over forcefully. My stomach dropped. That wasn't the house settling. No one moved for a few seconds. Then I slowly got up and crept toward the staircase, my friends right behind me. I peered over the railing, pointing my flashlight down. In the kitchen, a small table had been overturned, its legs pointing toward the ceiling, but there was nobody visible. "Hello," Matt called out, his voice stronger than I expected. No response. "It's probably just the wind," Jake said, though there was no way wind could have knocked over a table inside the house. "Let's just go," Kristen whispered, tugging at my sleeve. I was about to agree when we heard it, heavy footsteps running fast from what must have been the back of the house. They sprinted through what sounded like the kitchen, and then there was the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. None of us needed to discuss what to do next. We bolted down the stairs, nearly falling over each other. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Jake reached the front door first and yanked it open. We all spilled out onto the porch and took off running down the street. As I ran past the side of the house, I glanced toward the back and saw the rear door hanging off its hinges, swinging in the rain. We didn't stop running until we reached Jake's house, which was closest, half a block away. We burst into his garage, all gasping for breath, soaking wet from the rain. "What the actual fuck?" Matt panted, hands on his knees. "Someone was in there," I said, stating the obvious. Someone was in there the whole time. After catching our breath, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was another group of teens who had been exploring the house and got scared when they heard us. Maybe it was just a raccoon or something that had knocked over the table. We even laughed nervously, picturing some other kid running home just as scared as we were. None of us wanted to admit how terrified we'd been. We made a pact not to tell anyone what happened, partly because we were embarrassed about running away, and partly because we didn't want to get in trouble for breaking into the house. 3 days later, I was eating breakfast when my dad put the local newspaper on the table. A small headline caught my eye. "Squatter arrested in abandoned Derby house." My heart nearly stopped. I read the article twice, trying not to show any reaction. According to the paper, police had arrested a 37-year-old homeless man who had been living in the house for several weeks. They found drug paraphernalia and evidence he'd been dealing from the property. The arrest had happened the morning after our visit. I never told my parents we were there, but I immediately texted my friends the news article. We had all been in that house with a drug dealer just feet away from us. If we had gone downstairs instead of running, if we had confronted him, if he had been high or desperate. The article mentioned the man had a history of violent offenses. My blood ran cold thinking about how differently things could have gone. That night still haunts me 8 years later. Every time I visit my parents and drive past that house, which has since been renovated and sold, I think about those heavy footsteps running through the kitchen. I think about how close we came to potentially something much worse than just a scare. I've never gone urban exploring since then. The thought of who or what might be hiding in abandoned places keeps me away. That night taught me that sometimes the monsters hiding in the dark are real, and sometimes you're lucky enough to just hear their footsteps running away instead of toward you. Every time it rains at night, I'm right back there, frozen at the top of those stairs, watching that overturned table, hearing those footsteps pounding through the house. Sometimes I wonder if he heard us come in and was hiding the whole time, waiting to see what we would do. Sometimes I wonder if we interrupted something we weren't supposed to see. All I know is when I think about how close we came to going downstairs instead of running out, I still get that same feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I've never told this story outside of our friend group until now, but I still check the locks on my doors twice every night before bed. Story 2. I've never told this story online before. I've actually only told it to a handful of people throughout my life, and even then, I usually leave out some of the details because they still terrify me. But I think I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. This happened when I was 6 years old. My brother Keith was 8. We lived in a pretty normal suburban neighborhood in Ohio, the kind with 2 similar houses, basketball hoops in driveways, and families who had barbecues together on weekends. Our house wasn't anything special, a 2-story with my parents' bedroom downstairs and Keith's and my bedroom upstairs. It was summer break, probably around July, which meant no school and staying up later than usual. That night started like any other. Mom made spaghetti for dinner. I remember because I got sauce all over my favorite Ninja Turtles shirt. Dad watched some baseball game while Keith and I played with Legos in the living room until it was time for bed. Mom tucked us in around 9:30, read us a story about dinosaurs, and then went back downstairs where I could hear the TV still playing. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Keith always took longer. He was a restless sleeper. Our bedroom was simple. 2 twin beds on opposite walls, a shared dresser, some toys scattered around, and a nightlight shaped like a rocket that cast a soft blue glow across the room. The door to the hallway was directly across from our beds, and down that hallway was the stairwell door that led downstairs. I don't know what time it was when Keith woke me up. It must have been late because the house was completely silent. No TV, no parents talking. When I opened my eyes, Keith was standing over my bed, his face pale in the blue nightlight. "Mikey," he whispered, shaking my shoulder. "Mikey, wake up, listen." I was annoyed at first. "What?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "Shh, just listen." I sat up in bed, still groggy. Then I heard it. "Keith, Mikey." It was a soft voice calling from downstairs. It sounded like Mom. "Mom's calling us," I said, already pushing my blanket off. Keith grabbed my arm. His hand was sweaty and trembling. "No, Mikey. Something's wrong." "What do you mean? It's just Mom." It doesn't sound right." Keith's voice cracked a little. I listened again. The voice called our names once more. "Keith, Mikey, can you come down here?" It did sound like Mom, but there was something off about it. The way she was calling us seemed weird for the middle of the night. Mom never called us downstairs after bedtime. "I'm going to see what she wants," I said, sliding off my bed. I was stubborn like that. Keith grabbed my pajama shirt. "Don't, Mikey, please." I pulled away from him. "I'm just gonna look." I shuffled across our room to the door, the carpet rough under my bare feet. I remember how the doorknob felt cold in my small hand as I turned it slowly. The hallway was dark except for a sliver of light coming from under the stairwell door at the end. The voice had stopped. I tiptoed down the hall, my heart starting to beat faster with each step. When I reached the stairwell door, I hesitated. The light from downstairs was spilling through the crack beneath it, creating a thin golden line on the hallway carpet. "Mom?" I called softly, my hand on the doorknob. No answer. I took a deep breath and opened the door just a little bit, just enough to peek through. The stairwell was bright, all the downstairs lights were on, and that's when I saw her. At the bottom of the stairs stood a woman, just standing there, looking up, waiting. Even from just that quick glimpse, I knew instantly it wasn't my mom. My mom had shoulder-length brown hair. This woman's hair was long and dark. My mom was short. This woman was tall and thin, and she was wearing something white, not my mom's blue robe. The worst part wasn't how she looked, though. It was the feeling I got when I saw her. It was like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I felt cold all over, like I'd been dunked in ice water. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. She must have noticed the door open because her head tilted slightly, and then she spoke. "Hi, sweetie, come down." Her voice, it was almost my mom's, but not quite, like someone trying to sound like her but getting it wrong. The hairs on my arms stood up. I slammed the door shut so hard it echoed through the hallway. Then I ran back to our bedroom, tears already streaming down my face. Keith was standing in the middle of the room, his face white with fear. "I told you so," he whispered, as I rushed in and closed our bedroom door. "I told you so. I told you so." I was sobbing now, trying to be quiet but failing. "There's someone there. It's not Mom." "What do we do?" Keith's voice was shaking. "We need to wake up Mom and Dad for real," I said, wiping my nose on my sleeve. We both knew our parents were heavy sleepers. Dad always joked that a train could go through the house and they wouldn't hear it. So we started stomping on the floor as hard as we could. Keith grabbed a toy truck and started banging it against the wall. I just kept crying, getting louder and louder. We made enough noise to wake the dead, but there was no sound from downstairs, no footsteps coming up the stairs, no parents calling up to ask what was wrong. Just silence. That scared me even more. What if something had happened to them? What if the woman had done something? "The door," Keith suddenly whispered. "Lock the door." We never locked our bedroom door. We didn't even know it had a lock until that night. Keith fumbled with the little button on the doorknob, pushing it in until it clicked. The stomping and banging continued for what felt like forever. My feet hurt and my throat was raw from crying when we finally heard them. Rapid footsteps rushing up the stairs, then down the hallway. "Boys?" It was Dad's voice, and this time I knew it was really him. "Boys, what's going on?" The doorknob rattled. "Why is this door locked? Open up right now." He sounded angry, but I didn't care. I was so relieved to hear his real voice that I started crying even harder. Keith unlocked the door, and Dad burst in, Mom right behind him. Dad had his phone in his hand, like he was ready to call someone. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. But then he saw our faces and his expression changed from anger to concern. Mom rushed over and pulled us both into a hug. "What happened? Are you okay?" Between sobs, we tried to explain. Keith spoke first. "There was a woman. She was calling us from downstairs." Mom froze. She looked at Dad, and something passed between them. Look, I didn't understand then, but have thought about countless times since." "What woman?" Dad asked, his voice suddenly very calm and serious. "She was at the bottom of the stairs," I hiccuped. "She looked up at me and told me to come down." "She knew our names," Keith added. She was calling Keith Mikey, like she was Mom, but it wasn't Mom. Mom's arms tightened around us. I wasn't calling you boys. I was asleep. Dad moved to the doorway, peering down the hall. Stay here with the boys, he said to Mom. Lock the door. He disappeared down the hallway, and Mom quickly closed the door, locking it again. She led us back to our beds, but instead of separating us, she pushed the beds together and sat between us, an arm around each of our shoulders. It's okay, she kept saying, but her body was tense and she kept glancing at the door. Everything's going to be okay. I remember asking, who was that lady, Mom? She just shook her head. I don't know, sweetie, but Dad's checking the house. You're safe now. We sat like that for a long time. I could hear Dad moving around downstairs, opening and closing doors, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. At some point, I looked out our bedroom window and saw flashing lights. A police car had pulled up in front of our house. No sirens, just lights. Mom saw me looking and pulled the curtains closed. Try to sleep, she said, but none of us did. When Dad finally came back upstairs, he spoke quietly to Mom by the door. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like checked everywhere and no signs of entry and staying downstairs tonight. That night, for the first time ever, our parents slept on the floor of our bedroom. Dad brought up blankets and pillows and made a makeshift bed right in front of our door. Before they turned out the lights, Dad checked that all the windows were locked, even though we were on the second floor. Keep your door locked from now on, Mom told us before we went to sleep. Every night, we never had to lock our doors before that night. Ever. The next morning, no one talked about what happened. Mom made pancakes like it was a normal day. Dad spent hours outside checking the locks on all the doors and windows. A different police officer came by and talked to them privately. Over the years, I asked about that night many times. Who was that woman? Why did she know our names? But my parents always gave vague answers. They said it was probably just a confused woman who had the wrong house, or that we had imagined the whole thing a shared nightmare. But I know what I saw, and what bothers me most, even now as an adult, is how she knew our names. Not just that there were children in the house, but our actual names, Keith and Mikey, in that order. Called out in that almost but not quite Mom's voice. It wasn't a random break-in. It was targeted, specific, and my parents know more than they've ever told us. Keith and I have talked about it as adults. He remembers everything the same way I do. We've speculated that maybe it was related to Dad's job. He worked in insurance but was always vague about his clients. Or maybe Mom had an enemy from her past we didn't know about. Whatever the truth is, my parents took it to their graves. Dad died 3 years ago from a heart attack, and Mom passed last year from cancer. They never told us who that woman was or why she came for us that night. I still lock my bedroom door every night. I still check the stairs before I go to bed. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I think I hear someone calling my name from downstairs in a voice that's almost but not quite familiar. Story 3. I still can't wrap my head around what happened to me at Mercy Hospital last year. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake a little. I've tried talking about it with my therapist, my family, even a few close friends, but I always get the same reaction. Either they think I was hallucinating from medication, or they get that uncomfortable look people get when they think you're making stuff up for attention. So I figured maybe writing it down here might help me process it, and maybe someone else has experienced something similar. It started with screeching tires and headlights coming straight at me. I was driving home from my late shift at the marketing firm where I work. It was just after midnight, roads were empty, and I was only about 5 minutes from my apartment. I remember changing the song on my playlist and then seeing those headlights swerving into my lane. The police report later said the other driver's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. I don't remember the actual impact. My next memory is fragmented, ceiling lights flashing above me, someone cutting my clothes off, voices shouting medical terms I didn't understand. I learned later that I coded twice in the ambulance. My heart literally stopped beating, twice. The paramedics brought me back both times. When I properly regained consciousness, I was already in the ICU at Mercy Hospital. The pain was indescribable. Every breath felt like I was being stabbed. My body was basically one giant bruise. Both legs broken, 4 broken ribs, punctured lung, ruptured spleen, and a massive laceration that ran from the corner of my left eye up across my forehead and into my hairline. The doctors told my parents it was a miracle I survived. But surviving wasn't living, not then. The worst part wasn't even the physical pain, it was being trapped. I couldn't move, could barely speak above a whisper because of the breathing tube they'd had to insert. Just lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the beeping of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses coming to check my vitals or adjust my medication. Have you ever been completely alone with your thoughts for days on end? It's torture. I kept replaying the accident in my mind, thinking about how different my life would be now. Would my face be permanently disfigured? Would I ever walk normally again? The doctors were optimistic but non-committal. One day at a time, they kept saying, which only made me more anxious. By the 3rd night in the ICU, I was in a dark place mentally. The pain meds made me groggy, but didn't let me actually sleep. My hair was still matted with dried blood. They'd been so focused on keeping me alive that cleaning my hair was understandably low priority. But it bothered me so much. I could smell it, that metallic scent of dried blood mixed with the antiseptic hospital smell. It was a constant reminder of what had happened. That night, I think it was a Tuesday, I remember checking the clock on the wall repeatedly. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The hospital had quieted down. That eerie silence that feels almost heavy. The only sounds were the soft beeping of my monitors and the occasional distant voice from the nurses' station. At around 3 in the morning, my door opened. I expected it to be one of my regular nurses, Melissa or David, who worked the night shift. But it was someone I hadn't seen before. She was middle-aged, maybe early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wasn't wearing the same scrubs as the other nurses. Hers were older style, a deeper blue. She smiled when she saw I was awake. "You're having trouble sleeping," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I thought we might do something about that hair of yours. It can't be comfortable." I was surprised but so relieved. I managed to whisper a "thank you," and she nodded as if she understood everything I wasn't saying. She had brought supplies with her, a basin, towels, shampoo, and even a comb. I remember thinking it was strange that she was doing this in the middle of the night, but I was so grateful I didn't question it. "I'll be gentle," she promised, and she was. She managed to position everything so perfectly that not a drop of water spilled on my bed or the floor. Looking back now, I don't even understand how that was possible given the angle of my bed and my inability to move. As she worked, she talked to me in that soft voice, not asking questions that would require me to strain to answer, just gentle conversation that took my mind off everything. She told me she mostly worked weekend nights, which was why I hadn't seen her before. She mentioned she'd been at Mercy for more years than she cared to count. She talked about other patients she'd helped over the years, always respecting their privacy, but sharing little stories of recovery that gave me hope. Her hands were incredibly gentle as she worked through the tangles and dried blood. There should have been pain. My scalp was basically one big wound near the laceration, but somehow it didn't hurt at all when she touched me. It felt, I don't know how to describe it exactly, safe, like being cared for by someone who knew exactly what you needed. The whole process must have taken nearly an hour, but it felt like time had suspended. When she finished, my hair was clean, detangled, and she had even braided it loosely to one side so it wouldn't get tangled again. "There," she said, stepping back. "That's better, isn't it? Sometimes it's the small comforts that help us get through the darkest nights." I remember tears running down my face. Actual tears of gratitude for this simple act of kindness when I had been feeling so helpless and alone. She wiped my tears with a tissue and adjusted my blanket. "You're going to heal," she told me. "It will take time, but you're stronger than you know right now." Then she gathered her supplies and left. I slept better that night than I had since the accident. The next morning, I tried to thank her when my daytime nurse came in, but I didn't know her name. I described her as best I could to Nurse Jen, who looked confused. "I don't think we have anyone working nights who matches that description," she said. "But I'll check. Maybe she was filling in from another department." I didn't think much of it then. Hospitals are big places with lots of staff. Over the next few weeks, I focused on my recovery. The plastic surgeon did an amazing job with my facial laceration. He said I was lucky it was a clean cut rather than a jagged tear. Physical therapy was grueling but effective. 6 weeks after the accident, I was discharged to continue my recovery at home. It wasn't until I was stronger and able to return to the hospital for follow-up appointments that I began my search in earnest. I wanted to find that nurse and thank her properly. That small act of kindness had been a turning point for me mentally. After that night, I had started to believe I would recover, that there was still kindness in a world that had suddenly become so painful. I asked everyone I could, brought thank you cards and flowers to the ICU nursing station, described her in detail to the nursing supervisors. No one knew who I was talking about. "We don't wash patients' hair at 3 a.m., one supervisor told me gently, "and we would have documented any procedure like that in your chart." She showed me my chart. There was no record of any hair washing procedure that night. No record of any nurse entering my room between midnight and 6 a.m. except for the regular vital checks by Nurse David. I told myself maybe the nurse had forgotten to chart it. Maybe she'd done it on her own initiative. My dad has worked security at Mercy for over 15 years. He's the shift supervisor. I asked him to help me find her. Dad took it seriously. He pulled up the security footage from that night, focusing on the hallway outside my ICU room and the door to my room itself. We watched from midnight until morning. No one entered my room between David's midnight check and his 6 a.m. check, except for a doctor who came in briefly around 4 a.m. No one. Could the cameras have missed her somehow? I asked, desperate for an explanation. Dad shook his head. The system records continuously. There's no gap in the footage. No one entered your room at 3 a.m., honey. But someone had. My hair had been washed and braided. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't done it myself. I couldn't even lift my arms properly at that point. I became a bit obsessed, I'll admit. I visited the hospital repeatedly, showing up on weekend nights, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. I described her to every staff member I encountered. I even checked old employee records with my dad's help, thinking maybe she was a retired nurse who somehow still had access. Nothing. No one matching her description had ever worked at Mercy Hospital according to their records. The final confirmation came when I spoke with the night janitor who had been working in the ICU that night. He remembered me because of the severity of my injuries. When I described the nurse washing my hair, he looked at me strangely. "That's not possible," he said. "I was mopping the hallway outside your room from 2:30 until nearly 4 that morning. Nobody went in except Dr. Reeves for about 5 minutes, and there was definitely no water or hair washing equipment brought in or out." That's when I started considering explanations beyond the ordinary. I'm not a particularly religious or spiritual person, or at least I wasn't before. But how do you explain something that seemingly couldn't have happened, yet undeniably did? My hair had been filthy, matted with blood. By morning, it was clean, detangled, and braided. Someone had been there. Someone had spoken to me, comforted me, and helped me when I needed it most. I've since read accounts of similar experiences, hospital patients encountering compassionate caregivers who later couldn't be identified. Some people call them guardian angels or crisis apparitions. I don't know what to call my experience. I just know it was real. Whatever or whoever she was, that mysterious nurse appeared exactly when I needed comfort most. Her simple act of kindness gave me hope when I was at my lowest point. I still think about her words, "You're stronger than you know right now." Those words carried me through months of painful recovery. I've never seen her again, though I still look for her whenever I'm at Mercy. Part of me hopes I'll run into her someday so I can thank her properly. Another part of me has accepted that some things in life remain unexplained. All I know for certain is this: when I was broken, in pain, and losing hope, someone or something beyond ordinary explanation came to me. And washing my hair was just the physical act. What she really did was wash away my despair, even if just for that night. It was enough to help me find my way back. I still can't explain it. I don't think I ever will, but it changed me. Now I try to be that person for others when they're struggling, the one who shows up with an unexpected kindness. Because sometimes that's all it takes to help someone through their darkest hour. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened to me when I was teaching in Cambodia. It's been 17 years, but I remember every detail like it was yesterday. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear that static again. I was 26 and had just finished my TEFL certification when I got placed at a small school about 30 minutes outside Phnom Penh. I'd never been to Southeast Asia before, but I was eager for adventure and honestly wanted to escape my boring office job back home. I remember arriving in August, the humid air hitting me like a wall when I stepped off the plane. The school coordinator, a man named Vibol, picked me up and drove me to my accommodations. "Most teachers stay in the city," he told me as we bounced along the pothole-filled road in his ancient Toyota. "But we have a cabin near the school. It's cheaper, and you'll get to experience real Cambodian life." The cabin turned out to be a weathered wooden structure with a corrugated metal roof. It had electricity, running water that worked most of the time, and basic furniture. Nothing fancy, but I wasn't expecting luxury. What Vibol failed to mention was that directly across the narrow dirt road, stood an ancient Buddhist temple called Doi Theang, with a sprawling graveyard behind it. The temple itself was beautiful in a haunting way, ornate carvings on faded wood, golden accents that had long lost their shine, and stone statues of guardians flanking the entrance. "The monks are very quiet neighbors," Wiebel said with a smile. "They keep to themselves mostly." I settled in that first night, unpacking my meager belongings and trying to get comfortable despite the suffocating heat. I had a small TV that picked up a few channels, a bed with a mosquito net, a hot plate for cooking, and a bathroom with a shower that dripped rather than sprayed. Basic, but I could make it work for the year I'd be teaching. The first weird thing happened that very night. I'd fallen asleep watching the news on low volume, but woke up around 2 a.m. to the TV blaring static at full volume. I mean full volume. So loud it felt like my eardrums might burst. I stumbled out of bed, confused and half asleep, fumbling for the remote. When I finally got it turned off, I noticed all the lights in the cabin were on, though I distinctly remembered turning them off before bed. I chalked it up to power fluctuations. Cambodia's electricity grid isn't exactly reliable, especially in rural areas. Maybe there had been a surge that reset the TV and turned on the lights. I went back to sleep, but felt uneasy. The next day after teaching, I walked to the small market in the village to get some supplies. That's where I met Sreeman, an elderly woman who ran a fruit stand. She spoke surprisingly good English and seemed delighted to chat with me. "American teacher. Good, good. You stay at Old Cabin?" she asked while bagging some mangoes for me. "Yes, across from the temple," I replied. She nodded knowingly. "Good place, close to school. Many spirits there, but good spirits mostly," I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Spirits?" "Yes, yes. Temple spirits, graveyard spirits. Some stay in your cabin too." She said this so matter-of-factly, like she was telling me about the weather. "You can see them?" I asked, still thinking this was local humor. She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed ancient and knowing. "Sometimes. They like you, I can tell. They curious about new person." I smiled politely and paid for my fruit, but her words stuck with me as I walked back to my cabin. The temple looked different in the fading daylight, shadows stretching across its weathered facade. I could see a few monks in orange robes moving silently around the grounds, but otherwise, the place seemed deserted. That night it happened again. I'd been careful to keep the TV volume low, but at exactly 2:13 in the morning, I checked my watch. It blasted to full volume, static screaming through the small cabin. This time, the lights didn't just come on. They started flickering rapidly, like some kind of twisted disco. I ran around unplugging everything, but the TV kept blaring even after I yanked its cord from the wall. I stood there in the middle of the room, heart pounding, as the lights continued to flicker and the TV screamed static. Something in me snapped. I was exhausted, scared, and just wanted to sleep. "Stop it, Nkrumah!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. Everything went dead silent. The TV shut off mid-static. The lights stopped flickering and settled into a steady glow. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the noise had been. I stood frozen, my own words echoing in my head. Nkrumah. I had no idea where that name came from. I'd never heard it before, never read it anywhere. It just came out of my mouth like someone else was speaking through me. I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, staring at the unplugged TV, jumping at every creak and rustle. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but relieved. Somehow the darkness had made everything feel more threatening. I had to teach that day, running on no sleep and frayed nerves. During my lunch break, I found myself walking back to the market, seeking out Shreman. I needed to talk to someone who might understand what was happening. She was arranging papayas when I approached. Before I could even speak, she looked up and said, "The spirits bothered you." It wasn't a question. I nodded, feeling ridiculous but desperate. The TV and lights, they went crazy in the middle of the night, and I shouted a name I've never heard before, and everything just stopped. "What name?" she asked, her wrinkled hands pausing on a fruit. "Enkerma," I said quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. She set down the papaya and motioned for me to follow her to the back of her stall, away from other customers. "Enkerma is old spirit at temple," she whispered, "very powerful." "How you know this name?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It just came out." She studied my face for a long moment. "Perhaps you lived here before, in another life. Or perhaps Enkerma chose you." She reached beneath her collar and pulled out a small fabric pouch on a string. "Take this, for protection." I accepted it awkwardly, not knowing what to say. "What's in it?" "Herbs, blessed rice, temple ash. Keep it with you, especially at night." I thanked her and headed back to school, the pouch feeling strangely warm against my chest where I'd hung it. That night, I kept it on and slept with the lights on. Nothing happened. No TV static, no flickering lights. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But the next night, despite wearing the pouch, I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the room. I had no memory of getting out of bed. The TV was off, but the screen reflected something behind me. A dark shape, taller than a person should be, standing in the corner of the room. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't turn around to see what was there. In the TV's reflection, I could see it was vaguely human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It didn't move, just stood there watching me. I closed my eyes and started counting in my head, telling myself it wasn't real. When I reached 50, I opened my eyes. The reflection was gone. I spun around, nothing in the corner. I checked every inch of that tiny cabin, but I was alone. The next day, I asked Wiebel if there was anywhere else I could stay. He seemed confused by my sudden desire to move, but told me there might be a room available in the city in a few weeks. Not soon enough. That evening, I decided to visit the temple. Maybe if I understood the place better, I could make sense of what was happening. The monks welcomed me politely, though few spoke English. One younger monk named Sovan showed me around, explaining the temple's history. "Doi Thiang very old," he told me. "Before Buddhism, it was spirit place. Khmer people make offerings here to forest spirits." "Do you believe in these spirits?" I asked carefully. He smiled. "Buddha teaches us to seek enlightenment, not fear spirits. But," he lowered his voice, "many strange things happen here. We hear voices sometimes, see shadows that should not be there." "Have you ever heard of a spirit called Enkerma?" I asked. His smile disappeared. "Where you hear this name?" I shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Someone mentioned it. Enkerma, not Buddhist spirit. Very old, from before temple. We do not speak this name." He made a subtle gesture with his hand that looked protective. "You stay in cabin across road, yes? Be careful at night. Some say Enkerma takes people who sleep there." "Takes them where?" I asked, my mouth dry. Sovan just shook his head and changed the subject. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the cabin. I sat in a small cafe in the village until they closed, then walked around aimlessly until exhaustion forced me back. I stood outside my door for several minutes, gathering courage to enter. The cabin was dark and quiet when I finally went in. I left most of the lights on and lay down fully clothed on top of my bed. Srayman's pouch clutched in my hand. Despite my fear, exhaustion won out, and I fell asleep. I woke up standing in the graveyard behind the temple. The moon was full, illuminating the weathered gravestones and statues. I had no memory of leaving my cabin, crossing the road, or entering the temple grounds. I was barefoot, the earth cold and damp between my toes. I still had Srayman's pouch clutched in my fist. I tried to get my bearings, to figure out how to get back to the road, when I noticed movement among the graves, shadows shifting in ways that didn't match the moonlight, whispers that didn't sound like wind, and then I saw them, misty, translucent figures moving between the graves. Some looked human, others didn't. They seemed unaware of me, going about whatever business the dead have at night, except for one. Standing at the center of the graveyard was a tall, thin figure facing me. Even from a distance, I could tell this was what I'd seen reflected in my TV. It was vaguely human-shaped, but wrong. Arms too long, fingers like twigs, head slightly too large and oddly shaped. It didn't move, but I felt it watching me. I knew somehow that this was Inkerma. I stood frozen, unable to run, unable to call for help. The other spirits continued their wandering, but this one remained still, focused on me. Then slowly, it raised one long arm and beckoned. Without conscious thought, I took a step forward, then another. It was like my body wasn't my own anymore. I kept walking, toward the figure, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath misting in front of me, despite the Cambodian heat. When I was about 20 feet away, the figure spoke. Not out loud. The voice was in my head, but I heard it clearly. "You are not the one," it said in a voice like dry leaves rustling. And then it was gone. All the spirits were gone. I stood alone in the graveyard, shaking uncontrollably, clutching Srayman's pouch so tight my nails cut into my palm. I ran back to my cabin and packed my things that night. The next morning I told Vibol I was sick and needed to move to the city immediately. He looked concerned, but arranged for me to stay with another teacher until I could find my own place. I never went back to that cabin, never told anyone the full story of what happened. I finished my teaching contract and left Cambodia as soon as I could. It's been 17 years, and I still don't know what happened to me there. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe the isolation and culture shock caused hallucinations. Maybe there was carbon monoxide in that old cabin, but deep down, I know what I saw was real. I know that something ancient and powerful recognized me that night, then dismissed me. "You are not the one," it said. "Not the one for what?" I never found out, and part of me is grateful for that. I still have Srayman's pouch. I keep it in my bedside drawer, and on bad nights, I hold it while I try to sleep. I've never spoken the name Inkerma out loud again. Some names have power, and some spirits are better left undisturbed. But I wonder sometimes about that cabin, and who lives there now. I wonder if they wake up to static in the middle of the night, if they see reflections of things that shouldn't be there. And I wonder if, someday, Inkerma will find the one it's looking for. Story 5. I've been sitting here for hours trying to figure out how to even start this. My hands are still shaking just thinking about what happened, but I need to get this out of my system. Maybe someone here will have an explanation, because I sure as hell don't. Last year I took a job as a ranger in Blackwater National Forest. The pay was decent, and after my divorce, I needed to get away from everything. I thought isolation would help clear my head. Biggest mistake of my life. They assigned me to Pinecrest Station, which is basically the middle of nowhere. The nearest town, Millerville, is about 40 miles away on these winding mountain roads that seem designed to make you carsick. When my supervisor dropped me off at my cabin that first day, I remember feeling this weird sense of dread as his truck disappeared around the bend. I was completely alone. The cabin itself was a joke. It looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and this musty smell that never went away no matter how many windows I opened. The solar panels on the roof barely generated enough power to run the mini fridge and charge my phone. Most nights I lived by headlamp light or the glow from the wood stove. The first week was tough but manageable. I spent my days patrolling the trails, checking permits, and doing basic maintenance. I didn't mind the work. It was the nights that started getting to me. It began with the bats. There was a colony living in the attic, and every evening around dusk, they'd wake up and start scratching around. I could hear their little claws scrabbling across the ceiling, their high-pitched squeaks as they communicated with each other. At first it was just annoying, but I figured I'd get used to it. Then one night, about 3 weeks in, I heard something different. Footsteps on the wooden deck outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Not like an animal wandering by. This sounded like someone walking slowly around my cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. Nothing. Just darkness and the outlines of pine trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was probably just a deer or maybe a black bear. Wildlife is common out there, and I'd seen plenty of both during my patrols. But the footsteps came back the next night, and the night after that. Always around 3 in the morning, always the same slow, methodical pace. Sometimes they'd stop right outside my bedroom window, and I swear I could feel something staring at me through the glass. By the time I hit my 2-month mark at Pinecrest, I'd started sleeping with my ranger knife under my pillow. I know it sounds paranoid, but you have to understand how isolated this place was. No cell service most of the time. The radio only worked sporadically. If something happened to me out there, no one would know for days. That's when the scratching started. Not the bats. This was different. Lower, more deliberate. It started at the corners of the deck, then gradually moved toward the door, like something was testing the cabin's weak spots. I reported it during my weekly check-in calls, but my supervisor just laughed and said, "Welcome to Ranger life, Reed. The forest plays tricks on your mind." The only time I got to leave was Tuesday nights for my grocery run to Millerville. Those 4 hours were my lifeline to civilization. I'd stock up on supplies, grab a beer at the local bar, and soak up human interaction like a sponge. Then it was back to Pinecrest and another week of isolation. One Tuesday in my 3rd month, I returned to the cabin later than usual. It was already dark when I pulled up, and I had that feeling, you know the one, where you're certain someone's watching you. The hairs on my neck stood up as I killed the engine. I sat there for a minute, scanning the tree line with my flashlight, seeing nothing but knowing something was there. When I finally worked up the nerve to get out, I grabbed my groceries from the passenger seat and hurried toward the front steps. That's when I saw them. 2 eyes hovering in the darkness above my front door. Too high off the ground to be a coyote, but too low for a deer or elk. They reflected my flashlight with an eerie, yellowish-green glow. I froze. The eyes blinked slowly, then started moving forward, revealing the outline of something I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't moving like any animal I recognized, more like it was crawling, but vertically down the wall. In a panic, I dropped my groceries and grabbed a piece of firewood from the stack by the steps. I hurled it toward the eyes as hard as I could, yelling, "Get out of here!" The wood struck something solid. There was a flinch, a slight movement, but no sound, no growl, no hiss, nothing. Just those eyes, still fixed on me, unblinking now. I don't remember exactly how I made it inside. I just remember fumbling with my keys, practically falling through the door and slamming it shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, when I heard it, the slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin again. That night, I broke protocol. I have a personal shotgun I keep for emergencies. Rangers aren't supposed to carry firearms unless specifically authorized, but at that point, I didn't care about regulations. I loaded it, threw on my jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. "I know you're out there," I shouted into the darkness. "This is federal property. You need to leave now." Silence. Then a rustling in the brush about 20 yards out. I aimed my flashlight and caught those eyes again, blinking slowly. They hovered there for what felt like forever, then slowly backed away until they disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my rocking chair facing the door, shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. The next morning, a trail. Maintenance crew showed up unexpectedly. I must have looked like hell because the first thing the crew leader asked was if I was sick. I told them about the eyes, the footsteps, everything. They looked skeptical, but agreed to check around the cabin. That's when we found the tracks. Mountain lion prints, dozens of them, all around the porch, near my rocking bench, circling the cabin. The crew leader, Mike, said it was the biggest set of cougar tracks he'd ever seen. "You're lucky to be alive, man," he said. "This cat's been stalking you." They reported it to wildlife management and set up a couple of trail cameras around my cabin. They promised to check them when they came back through the area in a week. It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Because here's the weird part. Even though I continued to hear the footsteps every night, and sometimes even heard the rocking chair on my porch creaking like someone was sitting in it, I never found fresh tracks in the morning, not once, and the ground around the cabin was mostly soft dirt and pine needles. Anything walking around out there should have left prints, especially something as heavy as a mountain lion. During the day, I'd convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then night would fall, and the footsteps would return. Sometimes they'd be accompanied by a soft scratching at my door, like something was trying to find a way in. I started leaving my lights on all night, burning through my solar battery reserves by morning. I'd wake up to my alarm with the cabin freezing cold because I'd run out of power for the heater. But it felt safer than sitting in darkness. 4 months into my assignment, I hit my breaking point. It was a stormy night, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling through the trees. The perfect night for a horror movie, right? Except I was living in one. I'd managed to fall asleep somehow, exhausted from a long day of clearing fallen trees from the trails. Around 2 in the morning, a loud thud jolted me awake. Something had hit the roof hard enough to shake the whole cabin. I grabbed my shotgun and flashlight, heart racing. Another thud directly above my bedroom. Then the sound of something heavy sliding down the shingled roof, claws or nails scraping as it went. Then silence. I stood perfectly still, listening so hard my ears hurt. Nothing but the rain and wind. Until the doorknob started turning. Slowly, deliberately. I'd locked it, of course, but the old mechanism rattled in a way that told me it wouldn't hold against much force. I aimed my shotgun at the door, hands shaking so bad I wasn't sure I could hit anything if I tried. "I'm armed," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. Back off! The doorknob stopped turning. Then came a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like purring, but deeper, louder than any house cat. It seemed to vibrate through the walls. Then the scratching started again, not at the door this time, but at the window to my right. I swung around just in time to see those same yellow-green eyes peering in at me. They were at least 6 feet off the ground. Mountain lions don't stand that tall. I fired a warning shot through the roof. The noise was deafening in the small cabin, but it did the trick. The eyes disappeared, and I heard something heavy land on the ground outside, followed by the sound of it moving quickly away through the underbrush. I called my supervisor on the emergency radio the next morning and told him I needed immediate reassignment. I didn't care if it meant a demotion or a pay cut. I couldn't spend another night in that cabin. They sent a replacement 2 days later. As I was packing up my truck to leave, the new ranger, young guy, fresh out of training, asked me why I was giving up such a prime assignment. I just looked at him and said, "Keep your doors locked at night, and if you hear something on the porch, don't. Go out to check." He laughed like I was joking. I see now that they never told him the real reason I was leaving. It's been almost a year, and I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear those footsteps outside my apartment. The wildlife experts who checked the trail cameras said they malfunctioned due to moisture damage. They never caught anything on film. I requested copies of the photos of the tracks we found, but apparently those got lost during a system update. My incident reports were filed away as wildlife encounter, non-emergency. But I know what I experienced wasn't just a mountain lion. Mountain lions don't try doorknobs. They don't climb onto roofs during storms. And they sure as hell don't stand 6 feet tall to look through windows. Whatever was stalking me at Pinecrest is still out there. And sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if the new ranger is hearing those same footsteps circling his cabin, or if the thing in the woods was only interested in me. Story 6. I still can't believe I'm actually writing this down. I've told this story to maybe 3 people in my life, and each time I get the same, "yeah, right" looks. But I swear on everything I care about, what happened that summer was real, and it still keeps me up some nights. It was the beginning of June, 2 years ago, the summer of 2021. My buddy Henry and I had been talking for months about doing a real camping trip. See, we'd only ever done those family-friendly campgrounds where you're basically in a parking lot with a tent surrounded by RVs and people having cookouts. You know the type: bathrooms with running water, little camp stores selling overpriced ice, rangers driving by every hour. Not exactly roughing it. We wanted something authentic, something challenging. Just us against nature, or whatever that romantic bullshit is that you tell yourself before you realize what you're actually getting into. I spent weeks researching spots online. Henry wasn't much help. He'd just say, "looks good," to whatever I showed him. Eventually, I found this place about 3 hours from where we lived. It wasn't on any official camping maps, just a few mentions on some obscure hiking forums where people talked about true wilderness experiences. That should have been my first red flag. The spot required a 4-hour hike from the nearest access point. No facilities, no marked trails after a certain point, just pure backcountry. Perfect, right? God, I was so stupid. We left early that Saturday morning. The drive was uneventful, just us blasting music, stopping for snacks, the usual road trip stuff. When we finally reached the coordinates I'd saved, there was barely even a place to park, just a small gravelly area where the paved road ended and a dirt one began. No other cars, no signs, nothing to indicate anyone had been there in ages. The trailhead was basically just where the unmaintained dirt road became too overgrown to drive on. It was obvious nobody had maintained it in years. Tree branches scraped the sides of my car as we pulled in. The whole place had this weird vibe from the start, like we weren't supposed to be there. We grabbed our packs, way too heavy because we overpacked naturally, and started hiking around 11 in the morning. The trail, if you could even call it that, kept disappearing and reappearing. Sometimes we'd be walking through what seemed like a clear path, and then suddenly we'd be pushing through undergrowth, trying to figure out which way to go. Henry kept making jokes about getting lost and dying out there, which stopped being funny after the first hour. The deeper we went, the more I felt this weird pressure building, like something was off. But you know how it is when you've planned something for months. You don't just turn around because you've got a bad feeling. We finally reached our destination around 3 in the afternoon. It was this small clearing on top of a hill overlooking more endless forest below. The spot itself was nice. Flat ground for our tents, a circle of stones where people had obviously made fires before. But it was clear nobody had camped there in a long time. There were old beer cans partially buried in dirt, and some trash that had been there so long it was practically fossilized. Henry immediately started unpacking, but I walked to the edge of the clearing where the hill sloped down. That's when I saw them for the first time. Through the trees below, maybe 100 yards down, I could make out movement. People. 4 or 5 of them, moving between the trees. They weren't hiking on any trail I could see, just weaving through the forest. I couldn't make out any details except that they were adults, not kids. I called Henry over, but by the time he reached me, they disappeared into the thicker part of the forest. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably just other hikers exploring. But that didn't make sense. We were miles from anywhere, in a spot barely mentioned online, and they weren't on any trail. We spent the next few hours setting up camp, gathering firewood, and doing all the things you're supposed to do when camping. Everything felt normal again, and I started to think maybe I was just on edge from the difficult hike. As the sun went down, we got a fire going and broke out some beers we'd lugged all the way up there. The temperature dropped pretty quickly once it got dark. We sat around the fire talking about work, relationships, all the usual shit. For a while, it was exactly the experience we'd wanted. Then around 10 o'clock, we heard them. Voices. Multiple voices coming from the darkness of the forest below our campsite. Not yelling, not calling out, just normal conversational tones, like people talking among themselves, except we couldn't understand a word. It wasn't any language I recognized. Henry suggested it might be a foreign hiking group, but who the hell hikes in total darkness? We called out, "Hello, is someone there?" The voices immediately stopped. Complete silence followed, so thick you could feel it. Henry and I exchanged looks across the fire. Neither of us said anything, but I could tell he was freaking out too. Then we heard footsteps, just one set, coming up the hill toward our campsite. A minute later, a man walked right into the circle of our firelight. Tall guy, maybe in his 40s, with this long white hair down to his shoulders. The weirdest part was what he was wearing, a bright pink football jersey. Who the hell wears that hiking in the wilderness? He had this huge smile plastered on his face, but his eyes, they didn't match the smile at all. They were just fixed on us, unblinking. "Evening, boys," he said, way too cheerfully for someone who just appeared out of nowhere in the dark woods. "Beautiful night for camping." I managed to mumble something back while Henry just stared. The man stood there, not coming any closer to the fire, just hovering at the edge of the light. "I seem to have gotten turned around," he said. "Could you point me toward the trail back to the parking area?" Henry pointed vaguely in the direction we'd come from. The man didn't even look that way. He just kept staring at us with that same fixed smile. That's when I made the mistake of saying, "Are your friends lost too?" We heard voices down there. His smile faltered for just a second. Something dark flashed across his face before the smile snapped back into place. "No friends," he said too quickly. "I'm hiking solo. Nobody else out here tonight." It was such an obvious lie. The voices had stopped literally seconds before he appeared, and he'd come from exactly that direction. "Well, good luck," Henry said, clearly wanting the guy to leave. The man nodded, that smile still frozen on his face. "You boys enjoy your night. Don't stray from your campsite after dark. Easy to get lost." He lingered, for a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned and walked back into the darkness. As soon as he was gone, Henry whispered, "What the actual fuck was that?" I didn't answer because I was busy trying to process the whole interaction. Nothing about it made sense. The way he was dressed, the voices that suddenly stopped, the way he lied about being alone. For the next half hour, we sat in silence, both pretending to be casual, but I could tell Henry was as freaked out as I was. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just absolute stillness. Then Henry said what I'd been thinking. We should leave. We didn't even discuss it further. Both of us immediately started packing up our stuff. We didn't bother with most of it, just grabbed our backpacks, shoved in anything valuable, and kicked dirt over the fire. Just as the flames died down and darkness enveloped us, we heard it. A single footstep in the leaves behind us. I fumbled with my flashlight and switched it on, swinging it toward the sound. There he was, the same man in the same pink jersey, standing just 40 or 50 feet away at the edge of our campsite. Just standing there, staring, with that same wide, unnatural smile. He hadn't made a sound approaching except for that one deliberate step. That's when I noticed his hands. He was holding something. In the dim light of my flashlight, it looked like a large hunting knife. "Run," Henry whispered. We bolted, didn't even look back, just grabbed our bags and ran straight for the trail. I've never moved so fast in my life. The path was barely visible in our flashlight beams, but we somehow stayed on it, stumbling and tripping through the darkness. Behind us, I could hear them. Multiple sets of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. There were voices, too, shouting in that same strange language I couldn't identify. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. The whole time, those footsteps stayed behind us, never quite catching up but never falling too far behind either. It was like they were pacing us, keeping the distance intentional. Then, gradually, the sounds faded. We kept running until we physically couldn't anymore, collapsing on the trail, gasping for breath. We stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, listening intently, but heard nothing. The hike back to the car was the longest 4 hours of my life. Every snapping twig made us freeze. Every rustle in the bushes had us pointing our flashlights wildly into the darkness. But somehow we made it back to the parking area just as dawn was breaking. Our car was the only one there, exactly as we'd left it. We threw our bags in and sped away, not speaking until we were back on paved roads. To this day, I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. Were they some kind of weird cult? Criminals hiding out in the woods? Just messed up locals who get their kicks scaring hikers? I've looked online for reports of similar encounters in that area, but found nothing concrete. Henry and I don't talk about it much, but we haven't gone camping since. Not even at those family-friendly campgrounds. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking I hear footsteps outside my window. Or worse, seeing that man's face, with that unnatural smile that never reached his eyes, standing in the darkness at the foot of my bed. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I do. If someone told me this story, I'd think they were exaggerating or making it up entirely. But every word is true, and I still have no explanation for what happened that night. Story 7. I've been telling this story to friends for years, and most think I'm exaggerating or making it up entirely. But I swear every detail is exactly as I remember it. I've tried to rationalize it, but even 20 years later, I can't forget what happened that summer when I was 9. Growing up in Hangzhou wasn't always exciting. My neighborhood was being developed rapidly, with half-finished buildings and construction sites everywhere. My parents both worked long hours, so after school, I'd often explore these abandoned places with nothing better to do. In hindsight, they should have been more concerned about where I was wandering. This particular day in July was scorching hot. School was out for summer break, and I was bored beyond belief. My parents had left for work before 7 in the morning, and I had the whole day to myself. After watching cartoons and eating leftover rice for breakfast, I decided to go exploring in what we called the ruins, an abandoned construction project about 15 minutes from our apartment. The ruins were the remnants of what was supposed to be a shopping center, but the developer ran out of money halfway through. There were piles of broken bricks, twisted rebar sticking out at dangerous angles, and shattered tiles scattered everywhere. The place had been sitting untouched for at least 2 years. Other kids sometimes played there too, but that day I was alone. I remember wearing my favorite blue shorts and a Batman t-shirt my uncle had brought back from America. My cheap plastic sandals slapped against my heels as I climbed over concrete debris, imagining I was an explorer discovering ancient ruins. I'd been to this spot many times before, but somehow I wandered into a section I hadn't noticed previously. Behind a particularly large pile of debris and overgrown weeds was something different. A metal door set into the ground at an angle. It looked like it belonged to a maintenance tunnel or something similar, with flaking green paint and heavy rust around the edges. What caught my attention was that it was slightly open, maybe 10 centimeters. Usually these types of utility doors were padlocked. I'd seen similar ones around the city and had always wondered what was behind them. I hesitated at first. Even at 9, I knew I shouldn't be poking around in strange places. But curiosity got the better of me. I tugged at the heavy door and it groaned open just enough for my skinny body to squeeze through. Inside was a concrete stairwell descending steeply into darkness. The steps were narrow and worn, with small puddles gathered in the corners. I remember the immediate temperature change. It must have been at least 10 degrees cooler inside, a sharp contrast to the summer heat. The air felt heavy and damp, with a strong smell I couldn't identify at the time, but now recognize as rust, mildew, and stagnant water. I should have turned back right then, but instead I took a step down, then another. The metal door remained open behind me, letting in a shaft of sunlight that barely penetrated the gloom. Each footstep echoed off the concrete walls. The further I went, the stronger the smell became, and the darker it got. After about 20 steps, I paused. The light from the entrance had shrunk to a distant rectangle. I could barely see where I was placing my feet. That's when I first felt it, the sensation of being watched. Not just watched, but studied. The feeling was so intense that I actually turned around, half expecting to see someone behind me. There was no one, of course. I continued down, running my hand along the cold, damp wall for balance. I counted 47 steps in total before the stairwell ended. By then, I was in near total darkness, with only the faintest glow from the entrance far above me. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust, and slowly made out what appeared to be a corridor stretching ahead. That's when my foot hit water. I hadn't noticed it in the darkness, but the bottom step was submerged. Cold water seeped through my sandals, shocking me. I almost turned back then, but some stupid childish bravery made me take another step forward. The water quickly rose to my ankles, then my calves. It was ice cold, much colder than I expected for summer, and completely black. Not murky or dirty, absolutely black, like ink. I couldn't see my feet beneath the surface. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, my eyes now adjusted enough to make out rough concrete walls on either side of what seemed to be a flooded corridor. The ceiling was low, maybe 2 meters high, with pipes running along it. I realized I must have found some kind of underground utility tunnel or storage area. Years later, I learned it was actually an old civil defense shelter from the 70s, one of many built across the city during that era. As I stood in the water, trying to decide whether to go further or turn back, something brushed against my ankle. It was so light I almost didn't notice it, like a piece of fabric floating in the water. I thought maybe it was just trash or debris. Then it happened again, more deliberately this time. Something sliding across the top of my foot. It felt cold and slick, not like a fish or anything I could easily identify. It moved with purpose, whatever it was. I froze completely. The water around me had been still when I entered it, but now it seemed to be moving on its own. Small ripples appeared, not originating from my movements, but from something else in the water with me. The ripples encircled my legs, as if something was swimming around me. Then the worst part, I felt pressure against both my legs simultaneously, like something was examining me. Not bumping into me accidentally, but deliberately touching me from different angles. I got the distinct impression that whatever was in the water with me was curious about this intruder in its domain. That's when absolute terror took over. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I turned so fast I nearly fell face first into the black water. My hands slammed against the concrete wall as I steadied myself, and I began scrambling back toward the stairs. Something tugged at my left leg as I moved, not hard enough to pull me under, but definitely an intentional grab. I kicked wildly and broke free, splashing through the water as fast as I could. The water seemed to grow thicker, more resistant, as if it didn't want me to leave. I reached the stairs and practically threw myself onto the first step, my soaked sandals slipping on the concrete. I had to use my hands, crawling and clawing my way up. Water streamed from my clothes, and I was breathing so hard I thought my lungs would burst. About halfway up, I risked looking back. In the dim light, I couldn't see much, but I swear the black water at the bottom of the stairs wasn't still. It was moving in patterns that water shouldn't make, rippling and swirling without anything visibly disturbing it. I didn't stop to investigate. I scrambled up the remaining stairs, my knees scraping against the rough concrete. When I finally reached the top, I squeezed back through the opening and shoved the metal door shut behind me with all my strength. It closed with a heavy clang that seemed to echo forever. Outside in the bright sunlight, I stood gasping for breath, my clothes soaked from the knees down and dripping with black water that smelled of earth and decay. My legs were covered in scratches from the stairs, and my sandals were ruined. I noticed small red marks around my ankles where I'd felt the tugging, like someone had gripped me with long, thin fingers. I ran all the way home, not stopping once. By the time I got to our apartment, the water had mostly dried, leaving dark stains on my clothes. When my mother came home and saw the state of me, I told her I'd fallen into a dirty puddle while playing. I didn't want to explain where I'd been or what had happened. Even then, part of me was trying to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about black water rising around me, about being pulled down into darkness by something I couldn't see. I avoided the construction site completely. When school started again in September, I took a longer route just to avoid walking past it. Nearly 2 months later, curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to the site with a flashlight I'd stolen from my father's toolbox. I had to know if what I experienced was real or just my imagination. But when I reached the spot where the metal door had been, I couldn't find it. Either I was looking in the wrong place, or it had been covered by new debris or vegetation. Part of me was relieved. As an adult, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was just garbage floating in floodwater, or frogs, or even rats swimming around my legs. The darkness and my childish imagination could have transformed something ordinary into something terrifying. But I can't shake the memory of how that water moved with purpose, how it seemed to react to my presence, how it felt like something was studying me, and those finger-like marks on my ankles that faded after a few days. I can't explain those either. I've researched the history of that area since then. During the Cultural Revolution, that section of the city had several underground facilities built for military and civilian protection. Many were abandoned and forgotten when new construction began in the 90s. Water would have naturally seeped in over the years, but what was in that water? What was it that touched me, that seemed to want me to stay? I'll never know. I've never told my parents the complete truth about what happened that day. They wouldn't believe me anyway. Sometimes when I'm swimming and something brushes against my leg, even in a clear pool, I feel that same panic rising. And I still can't bring myself to walk through standing water if I can't see what's beneath the surface. Story 8. I've been debating for weeks whether to share this. I've told a couple close friends, but they either think I was just drunk or they get really uncomfortable and change the subject. Maybe writing it out will help me process what happened. This was about 2 months ago on Halloween night, and I still get chills thinking about it. So my roommate Jake and I are juniors at Westlake University. Our campus has this abandoned administrative building from the 1920s that sits on the edge of the East Quad. It's been condemned for like 15 years now. Broken windows, peeling paint, the whole creepy building package. Everyone calls it Whispering Hall because there are all these stories about weird stuff happening there. I never put much stock in ghost stories. I mean, college campuses are full of urban legends, right? But this place has a reputation. People claim they've seen the blinds move when there's no wind, heard doors slam when nobody's there, and a few swear they've heard the walls whispering if you stand close enough. My ex-girlfriend Megan was obsessed with the place and tried to get in several times, but said the doors were always locked tight. Anyway, it was Halloween night, and Jake and I had already hit up a couple parties. I won't lie, we were pretty drunk. Not falling down wasted, but definitely in that zone where bad ideas seem like adventures. We were cutting across the quad around midnight, heading back to our apartment, when we spotted something weird. Two men were walking toward Whispering Hall. There was something off about them right away. They were dressed normally enough, one in jeans and a dark jacket, the other in khakis and a button-up. But they moved with this weird purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going and why. And they definitely weren't students. They looked maybe mid-30s. Jake grabbed my arm and whispered, "Dude, check it out. Someone's actually going in there." We stopped about 50 yards away and watched as the men approached the main entrance. The taller one reached for the handle and, this is where it gets weird, the door just opened. No key, no struggle, nothing. He just pulled and it opened like it was waiting for him. Both men slipped inside and the door closed behind them. I remembered what Megan had said about trying the doors multiple times and finding them always locked. The building's been condemned for years. Those doors shouldn't open for anyone. "Holy shit," I said. "Did you see that? We gotta check this out." Looking back, I should have just kept walking home. But the alcohol had me feeling brave, and honestly, I was curious as hell. Jake was hesitant, but didn't want to seem scared, so he agreed. We jogged over to the entrance. The building looked even creepier up close. 3 stories of crumbling brick and dark windows. Some of the first-floor windows had boards over them, but most were just empty, like black eyes staring out. The front entrance had these massive wooden doors with rusty metal handles. I grabbed the same handle I'd just seen the man use and pulled. Nothing. It was completely locked. I tried again, harder this time, thinking maybe it was just stuck. Still nothing. "Let me try," Jake said, and gave it a good yank. The door didn't budge. "What the hell? We just saw those guys walk right in." We tried the other doors and even checked a couple windows, but everything was sealed tight. It made no sense. Those men had entered less than a minute before us. "Maybe there's another entrance they used," Jake suggested, but he sounded unsure. We decided to walk around the perimeter of the building. The moonlight cast these long shadows across the overgrown courtyard, and every sound had us jumping. I was starting to sober up from the adrenaline, and a growing sense of unease was replacing my curiosity. As we rounded the corner to the back of the building, we spotted them. The 2 men were standing at the edge of the courtyard about 30 yards away. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, looking at us. It was like they'd been waiting. "Hey," Jake called out, "how'd you guys get in there?" The men exchanged a glance before starting to walk toward us. Something about their movement felt wrong. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it wasn't natural either. Too fluid, too deliberate. When they got closer, I could see their faces better. The taller one had this half smile that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were oddly dark, not just brown, but like there was no distinction between iris and pupil. "You boys shouldn't go in there," he said, his voice surprisingly normal. "It's pretty spooky." The way he said spooky, like he was amused by some private joke, made my skin crawl. "We just saw you guys go in through the front," I said. "But now it's locked." "Is it?" the shorter one asked, raising his eyebrows. He had this weird accent I couldn't place, not foreign exactly, just off. "Yeah, we tried right after you went in," Jake said. "How'd you get out so fast anyway? And how'd you end up back here?" The taller one shrugged. "There are ways in and out that most people don't know about. I don't know why I was so determined, but the alcohol was still in my system, giving me false confidence. Can you show us how to get in? We've always wanted to see inside." The men looked at each other again like they were having a silent conversation. Then the shorter one nodded. "Sure," the taller one said. "Follow us." They led us back to the front entrance. The whole walk there, I had this feeling like I was making a huge mistake, but I kept going anyway. When we reached the doors, the taller man reached for the handle, the exact same one I'd tried, and pulled. Nothing happened. The door stayed shut. He frowned and tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. "That's weird," he muttered, but he didn't sound surprised. It was just open. We all stood there awkwardly for a moment. I was starting to feel really uneasy, and I could tell Jake was too. There was something about these men that just felt wrong, like they were wearing human suits that didn't quite fit. Then, out of nowhere, the shorter one looked directly at me and said, "At least my dad didn't die when I was 3. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My father died in a car accident when I was exactly 3 years old. It's not something I talk about often. Jake knows because we're roommates, but it's not public knowledge. It's definitely not something a stranger should know." The blood drained from my face. "What did you just say?" The man's expression changed, like he'd realized he'd made a mistake. His face literally paled, not just blanched with emotion, but like the color was draining out of him. "Awkward," he muttered. Without another word, both men turned and walked away. They didn't hurry, they just left, walking with that same unnatural grace back into the darkness beyond the courtyard. Jake grabbed my arm. "Dude, what the fuck was that about? I need to get out of here," was all I could say. My buzz was completely gone now, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. As we walked, practically ran back to our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. How could that man have known about my dad? It's not like he could have Googled me on the spot. We'd never introduced ourselves. And even if he somehow knew who I was, why bring up something so personal and painful? The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something else off about those men. Their clothes had seemed normal at first glance, but thinking back, there was something outdated about them. Not obviously vintage, just slightly wrong for 2023, like someone's idea of contemporary fashion from a decade ago. And their faces, I can't explain it exactly, but there was something almost generic about them. Like if you tried to describe them to a police sketch artist, you'd give the most basic description possible. Dark hair, average height, unremarkable features. Nothing distinctive to grab onto. We made it back to our apartment, and I immediately double-locked the door. Jake and I stayed up for hours talking about what happened, trying to make sense of it. He was as freaked out as I was about the comment about my dad. "Maybe they're just local weirdos who've been spying on students," he suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I've spent weeks trying to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe I was drunker than I thought. Maybe it was an incredible coincidence. Maybe they were just messing with random students on Halloween. But I don't believe any of that. There was something truly unnatural about those men and that building. The way they moved, the things they knew, how they appeared and disappeared so easily. I've avoided that part of campus entirely since then. Just thinking about Whispering Hall makes my heart race now. Sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those men watching me with their empty eyes and knowing smiles. I still don't believe in ghosts, not exactly. But whatever I encountered that night wasn't normal, and I can't shake the feeling that if we had somehow gotten inside that building, we might never have come out again. At least, not as ourselves. Story 9. I've been working as the gift shop manager on the Golden Horizon cruise ship for almost 3 years now. It's a decent job. I get to see amazing places along the South American coast while managing a small team and making good money. I'm based out of Rio, where we dock every 2 weeks between voyages. I've always been the practical one, the skeptic, the guy who rolls his eyes when someone mentions anything supernatural. My staff would sometimes call out sick or request shift changes because they didn't want to close the shop alone at night. They'd tell me with these wide, frightened eyes about the little girl who they'd glimpse between aisles or hear giggling after hours. I never held back my opinion on this. Grow up, I'd tell them. It's just the ship's movements playing tricks on your mind. Sometimes I'd mock them in our staff meetings, asking if the ghost girl enjoyed browsing our overpriced souvenirs. I was kind of an asshole about it, to be honest. Last night changed everything. We'd had a busy day in port at Rio. Passengers were loading up on last-minute souvenirs before the final leg of their journey. I had sent my evening staff home at 11:30 after we finished restocking, deciding to stay behind to finish the accounting and deposit in the ship's safe. The passenger areas were quiet by then, most guests either in the casino at the late-night buffet or asleep in their cabins. The gift shop is on deck 7, right off the main atrium. After everyone left, I locked the front glass doors, turned off most of the lights, except for the ones near my back office, and settled in with my spreadsheets and the day's receipts. The back office is small but functional, just a desk with a computer, a small safe, and some filing cabinets. There's a mirror on the wall facing my desk that lets me see the doorway and part of the shop floor behind me while I work. I've always appreciated that feature, as it lets me keep an eye out for anyone trying to sneak up on me. Around 12:15, I was deep into reconciling the day's sales when I felt a slight drop in temperature. Working on ships, you get used to the constant hum of engines and air conditioning, but something felt different. I remember rubbing my arms and thinking I should ask maintenance to check the ventilation. I went back to my work, typing figures into our inventory system. That's when I heard it. A soft sound like someone sliding their hand across the glass jewelry display just outside my office. I ignored it at first, assuming it was just the ship's normal creaking as we pulled away from port. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps. Light, quick footsteps, like someone in socks padding across the carpet. My first thought was that one of my staff had come back for something they'd forgotten. I called out, "Hello? Shop's closed." No answer. I swiveled in my chair to look at the doorway, but there was nobody there. The shop floor beyond was dim, with just the security lights casting shadows among the display shelves. I turned back to my computer, slightly annoyed at being spooked. That's when I saw her in the mirror. Just a glimpse at first, what looked like the top of a small head peeking around the doorframe. Dark hair, neatly parted. I spun around again, but the doorway was empty. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a shadow from a passing crew member in the corridor outside. I forced myself back to work, but I couldn't focus on the numbers anymore. A minute later, I heard it. A giggle. Soft, but distinct. Like a child trying not to laugh during hide and seek. I looked up at the mirror again, and this time I saw her clearly. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair and pigtails, wearing what looked like a blue and white cruise outfit from at least 20 years ago based on the style. She was standing just inside the doorway, partially hidden, watching me with a smile. But when I whipped around, there was nobody there. I stood up so fast I knocked over my chair. "Hello," I called again, my voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there? This isn't funny." I walked to the doorway and peered out into the shop. Empty. I even got down on my hands and knees to check if some kid had snuck in and was hiding behind the counters. Nothing. When I came back to my office, the temperature seemed to have dropped even further. I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. This isn't normal, I thought. I'm in fucking Brazil. It shouldn't be this cold. I sat back down, trying to calm myself. Just finish the work and get out, I told myself. I glanced at the mirror again and my blood froze. She was standing right behind my chair. I could see her clearly now. Dark eyes, olive skin, a small gap between her front teeth as she smiled. She looked solid, not transparent like you'd expect a ghost to be. But there was something wrong about her. The way the light didn't quite reflect properly off her form. The way she seemed to be there and not there at the same time. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at her reflection, terrified to turn around. She tilted her head, studying me curiously. Then she raised her hand and waved, her smile widening. I broke. I jumped up and spun around, but again there was nothing behind me. The office was empty. As I stood there, my heart threatening to burst from my chest, I heard her giggle again, this time from the shop floor. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as a model ship on one of our display shelves slowly rotated on its own, as if someone was examining it with invisible hands. Then the lights in the office flickered, and I heard her voice, clear as day. "Play with me." That was it. I grabbed my phone and bolted. I didn't even bother to close the safe or shut down the computer. I just ran, fumbling with my keys to lock the shop's glass doors behind me, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The atrium was dimly lit and deserted. As I waited for the elevator, frantically jabbing the button, I felt a cold spot move past me, like someone walking by, though I was alone. The elevator finally arrived with a cheerful ding that seemed obscene in the silence. As I stepped inside, I heard the giggle again, right next to my ear. I spun around, but the elevator was empty. I pressed the button for Deck 4 where crew cabins are located, desperate to get to my friend Sophia's room. She's worked on the ship for over 10 years and would know what to do. The elevator started moving, but then slowed and stopped at Deck 9. The doors opened to an empty hallway. Nobody got on. "Going down," announced the automated voice as the doors closed again. But instead of continuing down, the elevator went up to Deck 10, then 11. At each floor, the doors opened to empty corridors. No one getting on or off. By the time it finally started descending, I was drenched in cold sweat. It stopped at Deck 7 again, where the gift shop is located, and the doors opened. I stood there, unable to move, staring at the empty corridor. After what felt like an eternity, the doors closed and the elevator continued down to Deck 4. I practically ran to Sophia's cabin and pounded on her door until she answered, confused and half asleep. One look at my face, and she pulled me inside without asking questions. I broke down completely then, sobbing like a child as I told her what happened. I expected her to laugh, to tell me I was being ridiculous. Instead, she looked grim and nodded. "You saw Isabella," she said quietly. "Who the hell is Isabella?" I demanded, still shaking. Sophia sat me down and made me some tea. "She was a passenger about 22 years ago," she explained. 7 years old. She was running through the gift shop playing tag with some other kids, even though they weren't supposed to. She ran out into the atrium and climbed on the railing to hide. She fell 7 decks to the lobby below. I felt sick. Why hasn't anyone told me this before? "Everyone knows not to talk about it around new managers," she said. "The ones who don't believe never last long anyway." She told me more while I tried to stop my hands from shaking. Apparently, Isabella's been spotted by crew members for years. Sometimes she plays with the merchandise after hours. Sometimes she rides the elevators, always stopping at Deck 7. Staff have reported hearing giggles, finding toys moved from their displays, feeling cold spots. That's why nobody wants to close the shop alone, Sophia explained. Isabella gets lonely at night. I didn't sleep at all. I've called in sick today, hiding in my cabin. I can't face going back to that shop. I can't face my staff knowing how I mocked them. I've spent the morning researching ship accidents online, and sure enough, there it was. A small article about a child's fatal fall on this very ship 22 years ago. Isabella Mendez, age 7, survived by her parents and younger brother. I don't know what to do now. I've always been so certain about how the world works. I've always been the rational one, the one who scoffed at ghost stories. Now I'm the one afraid to walk past the gift shop. I'm the one jumping at every sound, checking mirrors constantly, holding my breath when I feel a cold spot. The senior officer came to see me earlier, concerned about my sudden illness. When I finally broke down and told him what happened, he wasn't surprised. "She likes you," he said, as if that should comfort me. "She doesn't show herself to just anyone." I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I have another 8 days on this voyage before we return to Rio, and I don't know how I'm going to make it. The worst part is, I have to go back to that shop tomorrow. It's my job. But how do I go back there, knowing she's waiting? I just checked my phone and found something that makes this even more terrifying. There's a photo I don't remember taking from last night. It shows my empty office, but in the mirror you can see her clearly, standing right where I was sitting, her small hand reaching toward the camera, that gap-toothed smile on her face. I've deleted it 3 times. It keeps coming back. Story 10. I've never told anyone this story before, but it's been eating at me for months now, and I need to get it off my chest. Growing up, my mom was always pretty vague about her past in Mexico. I mean, I knew the basics. She grew up in some border town near Texas, moved to the States when she was around 20, met my dad a few years later, and that was that. Whenever I'd ask for more details about her childhood or her family back in Mexico, she'd either crack some joke, change the subject, or give these super general answers that didn't really tell me anything. As a kid, I didn't think much of it, but as I got older, I started noticing how weird it was that she never talked about her past. We never visited Mexico, never met any relatives from her side, and there were barely any photos of her before she came to the US. The few times I pushed for answers, she'd just say something like, "Oh, my family were politicians on one side and crooks on the other," and laugh it off like it was some inside joke. The only other clue I had was this name, R. I overheard it one night when I was maybe 16. I'd gotten up to grab some water, and I heard my mom on the phone in the kitchen, speaking rapid Spanish in this hushed, urgent tone I'd never heard from her before. She kept saying this name, R, and even through the door, I could tell she was upset. When I walked in, she immediately hung up and acted like nothing happened. When I asked who she was talking to at 2 a.m, she said it was just an old friend from back home with time zone issues. Fast forward to last summer. I was 22, just finished my 3rd year of college, and was driving down to Tucson to meet up with my buddy Jake for a weekend camping trip in the mountains. It was late June, scorching hot even with the AC blasting, and I was about 3 hours into the drive through the Sonoran Desert. Nothing but cacti, dirt, and empty road for miles. I called my mom to kill time, like I always do on long drives. We were chatting about the Copa America games, arguing about whether Mexico had any chance against Argentina. Normal stuff. It was around 4 in the afternoon the sun still high and harsh. That's when I saw them. Two pickup trucks parked horizontally across the road about a quarter-mile ahead. At first, I thought it was construction or an accident, so I slowed down. But as I got closer, I realized there were no cones, no flashing lights, nothing official. Just these two beat-up trucks blocking both lanes on this empty desert highway. Something felt off immediately. I told my mom, "Hey, there's some kind of roadblock ahead. Looks weird." She started asking questions, but before I could answer, I was close enough to see three guys standing between the trucks. They weren't wearing uniforms. One had what looked like a bandana covering the lower half of his face. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was the middle of nowhere, no exits, no turn-offs, nothing but desert on both sides of the road. I couldn't turn around without drawing attention, and the shoulder was too narrow to pull any kind of U-turn without risking getting stuck in the sand. I slowed almost to a stop about 50 yards away, desperately trying to think of what to do. That's when I saw it, the glint of something metallic in one of the guy's hands. A gun. "Mom," I whispered, my mouth suddenly bone dry. "I think these guys have guns. What do I do?" She started saying something, but one of the men was already walking toward my car, waving for me to approach. The other two spread out, one moving to the side of the road where I'd have to pass. I don't know why, but I didn't end the call. Maybe I thought having my mom listening would somehow help, or maybe I was just too scared to think clearly. I put the phone down on the passenger seat, the call still active, and drove slowly forward. As soon as I got to the trucks, all three men surrounded my car. The one who looked like the leader, tall, maybe in his 30s, with these cold eyes, tapped on my window with the barrel of his pistol. I rolled it down, my hands shaking so bad I could barely operate the button. "Get out," he said in heavily accented English. I hesitated, and he raised the gun slightly. "Now." I opened the door slowly and stepped out into the heat. My legs felt like they might give out. The desert air was suffocating, not just from the temperature, but from the absolute terror squeezing my chest. "Wallet, phone, keys," the leader demanded, while the other two started looking through my car. I handed over my wallet with trembling hands. As he flipped through it, taking out my driver's license and examining it, one of the other guys shouted something in Spanish from inside my car. The leader looked up sharply. "You on phone?" Before I could answer, he walked to the passenger side and picked up my phone. I watched through the window as his expression changed when he realized the call was still connected. He put it to his ear. What happened next still doesn't make sense to me. His whole demeanor shifted. He was speaking Spanish rapidly into the phone, my mom's phone, and I caught just fragments. "No sabíamos que," and then, "Perdónanos," followed by that name again, R. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. The other guys stopped searching my car and stood watching their leader, looking increasingly uncomfortable. When he finished, he actually handed the phone back to me through the window. "Your mother," he said, suddenly respectful. "Talk." I took the phone, completely confused. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice was steady but tight with tension. "Yeah, I think so." "What?" "It's fine now," she cut me off. "They made a mistake. They're going to let you go." "What? How do you—" "Not now," she said firmly. "We'll talk later. Just get back in your car and keep driving once they move." The leader was already ordering the others to move the trucks. They were working quickly, almost nervously now. One of them brought my wallet back and handed it to me, minus the cash. "Tax," he said with an awkward smile, "for the trouble." Within 5 minutes, they had cleared the road. The leader gave me a nod, not friendly but respectful, before they all climbed into their trucks and drove off the highway into the desert on some dirt trail I hadn't even noticed. I stood there for a minute in the baking heat, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally got back in my car, my mom was still on the phone. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice cracking as the adrenaline started to wear off. "How did you get them to leave me alone?" "I told them I'd call the police," she said simply. "Bullshit," I shot back. "Those guys weren't afraid of the police." And I heard that name, R, the same one from that late-night call years ago. "Who is that, Mom? What aren't you telling me?" There was a long pause. "It's complicated, mijo. Those men made a mistake. That's all you need to know. Mom, they had guns. They were going to rob me or worse, and then they just changed their minds after talking to you. That doesn't happen." "You're safe now," she said firmly. "That's what matters. We can talk when you get home." But we didn't talk when I got home. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd shut me down or find some reason to leave the room. After a few attempts, I stopped asking. Partly out of frustration, but if I'm being honest, also out of fear. Fear of what the answer might be. It's been 4 months since that day in the desert, and I still can't shake the feeling that my mom has connections to something dangerous back in Mexico. Something that's still active despite her being in the US for over 25 years. The way those armed men reacted to her name, or whoever R is, that wasn't normal. I've done some digging since then. Nothing too deep, just basic internet searches about the border town she's from. Turns out it's been a major hub for one of the cartels since the 90s. Was her family involved somehow? Is R some high-ranking cartel member she knows? Or worse, is R a family member? Sometimes I catch her watching the Spanish news channels, especially when they're covering stories about the cartels. Her face gets this distant look, like she's seeing something beyond the screen. Once, when there was a story about a raid on some cartel leader's compound, I swear I saw her hands shaking. I keep telling myself maybe it's innocent. Maybe an old boyfriend became involved in something bad, or maybe a childhood friend went down the wrong path. But those men in the desert knew who she was, or at least knew who R was, and that connection was strong enough to make armed robbers back down immediately. Part of me wants to confront her again, demand the truth, but another part is terrified of what I might learn. What if my mom was involved in something terrible? What if she still is? Or what if pushing too hard puts us both in danger? For now, I'm keeping quiet. But every time my phone rings and I see it's her calling, I hesitate before answering. Every time we talk about mundane things, my classes, her garden, the weather, there's this unspoken thing hanging between us. This secret that saved my life but might destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. That day in the Sonoran desert changed everything. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened, and the questions it left behind. Questions I'm not sure I'll ever have the courage to ask again. Story 11. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. I'm still struggling to process everything that happened, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help make sense of it all. This happened just last week during that massive snowstorm that hit our area. I live in a small 2-story house in a generally quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a modest place that I've called home for the past 3 years. With the heavy snowfall, my company told everyone to work from home until the roads cleared up. My home office setup is basically a desk pushed against my bedroom window on the 2nd floor. It's not ideal, but the natural light is good for video calls, and I can see my driveway from there. That day, I was working on a report that was due by 5, completely absorbed in spreadsheets and emails. Outside, the snow kept falling steadily. It must have been around 4 inches deep by mid-afternoon. Around 6, after I finished work, I realized I hadn't taken the trash out. The bins needed to go out for collection the next morning, assuming the trucks could make it through. I bundled up, coat, gloves, boots, the works, and trudged through the snow to drag the bins to the curb. On my way back, something caught my eye. At first, I didn't think much of it, just some indentations in the snow along the left side of my house. But as I looked closer, I realized they were footprints, clear human footprints. My first thought was rational enough. Maybe the mail carrier had walked around that way for some reason. But we hadn't had mail delivery that day because of the storm. Plus, these footprints didn't follow a logical path from front to back. They came from somewhere behind my house, through my side yard. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed them, my heart starting to beat a little faster with each step. The tracks led directly to the side of my house and continued along it. As I turned the corner, I felt my stomach drop. The footprints stopped directly under my bedroom window, the same window I'd been sitting in front of all day long. Just stopped, right there. Whoever made them had stood there, likely looking up at me while I worked, completely oblivious. I stood there for a good minute, staring at those footprints and feeling increasingly uneasy. They were fresh, made within the last few hours, while the snow was still falling. The snow inside them wasn't as deep as the surrounding area. Someone had been watching me. Today. Recently. I looked up at my bedroom window, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. From outside, especially when it's dark and the lights are on inside, you can see everything. I had been sitting there for hours, completely visible to whoever stood in this exact spot. I hurried back inside, double-checking that I locked the door behind me. My mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. Was it just kids messing around, a curious neighbor, or something worse? I tried to calm myself down. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. That evening I went about my routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing out windows, expecting to see someone staring back. Before bed, I made a point to check that my bedroom window was securely locked. It was. I also noticed that fresh snow had started to cover those footprints, which gave me some relief. By morning, they'd probably be gone completely. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak and groan of the house settling made me jolt awake. At one point, I could have sworn I heard something scraping against the side of the house, but when I listened more carefully, there was nothing, just the wind. The next morning, I woke up exhausted, but determined to put the whole thing behind me. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and tried to focus on work. But something kept nagging at me. I needed to check outside, just to be sure the footprints were gone. I went to my back door and looked out. My blood ran cold. There, in the fresh snow that had fallen overnight, were new footprints. The exact same pattern as before. Leading from the back of my property, along the side of my house, and stopping directly beneath my bedroom window. Someone had come back. While I was sleeping, someone had stood outside my window again. This time, I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher seemed concerned, but explained they couldn't send anyone immediately due to the storm. They took my information and said an officer would stop by when available, but it might not be until later that day. They suggested I keep my doors locked and call back immediately if I saw anyone suspicious. Not very reassuring, but what could I do? I couldn't just leave. The roads were still bad, and I had nowhere to go anyway. So I went back to my desk, moved it away from the window a bit, and tried to focus on work. Every few minutes, though, I'd peek outside, scanning for any movement. The day dragged on like this. I was jumpy, distracted, constantly checking the window. No sign of anyone outside, but that didn't make me feel any better. Whoever it was could come back any time. As evening approached, the sky darkened early as it does in winter. I closed all my blinds and curtains, turned on every light in the house, and tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I heated up some leftover pasta for dinner but barely tasted it. My appetite was gone. Around 8, I decided to do another check of all the doors and windows before trying to get some sleep. Everything downstairs was secure. I made my way upstairs, checking the spare room first, then the bathroom. Finally, I entered my bedroom. The window looked normal at first glance, but as I approached to check the lock, something felt off. I reached out, touched the latch, and it moved freely. The window was unlocked. I froze. I had checked this window twice the night before. It had definitely been locked. I remember the specific feeling of pulling on it to make sure. With trembling hands, I pushed the window slightly, testing it. It slid open easily. Someone had unlocked it from the outside while I was sleeping. In that moment, all rational thought fled. Pure fear took over. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and my car keys, and I ran. Down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door. I didn't even put on a proper coat. I just ran to my car, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Once inside, I locked all the doors and called 911. This time, I wasn't calm. I wasn't collected. I was terrified. I told the dispatcher everything, the footprints, the unlocked window, all of it. She stayed on the line with me, telling me an officer was on the way. I sat in my freezing car, watching my house, wondering if someone was still inside, watching me from one of the windows, waiting. It took about 15 minutes for a police car to arrive. An officer, a tall guy named Peterson, spoke to me briefly, took my keys, and entered the house alone after calling for backup. He told me to stay in my car with the doors locked. I watched from my car as he disappeared inside. Minutes passed, 5, 10, nearly 20, way too long. Something was wrong. Backup hadn't arrived yet. I was about to call 911 again when suddenly the front door opened. Officer Peterson emerged, but he wasn't alone. He was escorting a man in handcuffs. Even from a distance, I could see blood on both of them. The officer had a cut on his face. The man, Jesus, I'll never forget how he looked. Dirty clothes, wild eyes, blood smeared across his face and hands. 2 more police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Everything happened quickly after that. The man was put in the back of a police car. Officer Peterson came over to me, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said. He explained that he'd found the man hiding in the stairwell between the first and second floors of my house. When discovered, the man attacked him with a knife. Peterson subdued him, but not before getting cut. The man was approximately 45 years old, with no ID on him. He wasn't making sense when they questioned him, just mumbling and sometimes laughing. They found several items on him that disturbed me to my core: a roll of duct tape, a hunting knife, the one he'd attacked the officer with, and this is the part that still makes me sick: several strands of hair that they believed were taken from my hairbrush. The officer told me they believed the man had been watching me for days, possibly weeks. The footprints I discovered were just the first time I'd noticed. He had been unlocking my window gradually over several nights, loosening it bit by bit so I wouldn't notice until it was completely unlocked. I've been staying with my parents since then. The police are still investigating, trying to identify the man. They found a makeshift camp in the woods behind my property where he'd apparently been living, watching my house. There were newspaper clippings, bizarre drawings, and other things I don't even want to know about. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the window was unlocked that night, or what his plans were. I don't want to know. I'm looking for a new place to live now. I can't go back there. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear footsteps in the snow outside my window. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe again. And I'll never forget the officer's words when I asked him what might have happened if I hadn't called when I did. Let's just be thankful we'll never have to find out. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer when I was 8, nearly 9. It's been over 20 years, but I've never been able to shake the memory or find any explanation for what I discovered. My family spent every summer at my grandparents' beach house in Driftwood Bay. It was this massive wooden structure with weathered blue siding and a wraparound deck that looked out over the ocean. The best part of summer was always those 3 weeks in July when all my cousins, aunts, and uncles would pile in. There'd be like 15 of us crammed into that house, fighting over bathrooms and who got to sleep on the screened-in porch. That particular summer, I think it was 2002, was different. The Weather Service had been predicting a major hurricane might hit the coast, so the town had constructed these enormous sand dunes all along the beach. They were massive, like walls of sand that completely blocked the view of the ocean from the boardwalk. I remember my grandfather complaining because he couldn't sit on the deck and watch the waves anymore. The night it happened started like any other. We'd spent the day playing in the waves and digging in the sand. My older brother, Sean, had been a complete jerk all day, the way 12-year-olds often are to their younger siblings. During dinner, he kept kicking me under the table and then acting innocent when I'd yelp. When I finally kicked him back, I was the one who got in trouble. Mom sent me to the bedroom I was sharing with Sean and 2 cousins, telling me I needed to cool off before dessert. I was so mad. It wasn't fair. I sat on my bed, fuming, listening to everyone laughing in the kitchen. After about 20 minutes, I made a decision that still haunts me. I decided to sneak out. It wasn't hard. Our room had a sliding glass door that led to a small section of the deck. I slipped outside, careful to leave the door open just a crack so I could get back in. It was that perfect beach time, maybe 8:30 in the evening, when the sun hasn't quite set, but everything has this golden pinkish glow. Normally, there would be people everywhere on the beach and boardwalk, but that evening, it was eerily empty. I figured most tourists had canceled their trips because of the hurricane warning. I walked along the boardwalk, trailing my hand along the weathered railing. The huge sand dunes made everything feel different, almost closed in. Where there should have been an expansive view of the ocean, there was just this wall of sand. I remember thinking it looked like a giant had scooped up the beach and piled it into a barrier. I'd walked maybe 10 minutes from our house when I noticed something strange, wisps of smoke rising from behind the dunes. At first, I thought maybe the lifeguards were having a bonfire, but then I remembered they weren't supposed to do that when there was a fire warning in effect, which there was because of the dry conditions and high winds expected with the hurricane. Being a curious kid with nothing better to do, I decided to investigate. I scrambled up the side of the nearest dune, my sneakers slipping in the loose sand. It was steeper than it looked, and I had to use my hands to pull myself up the last few feet. When I reached the top, I peered over. There, about 50 feet down the beach, was a bonfire. But what struck me as immediately weird was that there was nobody around it. No chairs, no coolers, no people laughing and roasting marshmallows. Just flames eating through what looked like a random pile of stuff. I slid down the dune toward the beachside, getting sand in my socks and shorts. As I approached the fire, I kept looking around, expecting to see the people who'd started it. But the beach was completely deserted in both directions as far as I could see. The fire wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. It was burning pretty intensely, and I could feel the heat from several feet away. I'd been raised to be responsible about fire safety. My dad was kind of obsessive about it, so seeing an abandoned fire made me nervous. What if it spread? What if the wind picked up embers and carried them somewhere dangerous? I looked around one more time for any sign of who might have started it, calling out a hesitant hello that just got swallowed up by the sound of the waves. Nothing. Nobody. So I decided to put it out. There was plenty of sand around, so I started kicking it onto the edges of the fire, gradually working my way inward. It took about 5 minutes of kicking sand to get the flames down to just a few smoldering spots. My shoes got pretty scorched, and I remember thinking I'd have to explain that to Mom somehow. Once the fire was mostly out, I got curious about what had been burning. I grabbed a piece of driftwood and poked at the pile. That's when I felt this weird drop in my stomach, like when you miss a step going downstairs. They were clothes, kids' clothes. I pushed aside some of the charred fabric with the stick. There was a t-shirt that looked about my size, some jeans, what might have been a baseball cap, and sneakers that weren't too different from the ones I was wearing. They weren't just any random clothes. They were clothes like mine. Boy clothes for someone around 8 or 9 years old. But that wasn't the worst part. Mixed in with the clothes were photographs. Most were completely burned, just ashes or blackened paper curling at the edges. But one had only been partially burned. I carefully picked it up by the corner that wasn't hot. It was a picture of a kid about my age. The photo was damaged, but I could make out enough of the face to see the boy had dark hair and a round face, kind of like mine. He was smiling in the photo, standing in front of what might have been a school building. As I stared at it, my hands started shaking. The kid looked like he could have been my cousin, or maybe even me in a different haircut. It wasn't me, I knew that, but the resemblance was unsettling. I dropped the photo back into the smoldering pile, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. Just the waves and the sound of my own breathing. Why would someone burn a kid's clothes and pictures? My mind started racing with possibilities, none of them good. That's when I heard it. A voice calling from down the beach. "Hey, don't move, stay right there." I turned to see a man walking rapidly toward me from about 100 yards down the beach. Even from that distance, I could tell a few things. He was bald, he was wearing a dark shirt, and he was having trouble walking straight, like he was drunk or hurt. And he was focused completely on me. "I said don't move," he shouted again, picking up his pace. There was something in his voice that sent ice through my veins. It wasn't concern or authority. It was anger. Pure anger. I stood frozen for about 2 seconds, my brain trying to process what was happening. Then survival instinct kicked in. I turned and ran toward the dune wall, abandoning the stick I'd been using to poke the fire. The sand made running difficult. My feet kept sinking in, and I could hear the man behind me, his footsteps getting closer. He was shouting something I couldn't understand anymore, his words slurring together. I hit the base of the dune and started climbing, digging my fingers into the sand, pulling myself up. The sand gave way under my feet, making each step only half as effective as it should have been. I was breathing hard, not daring to look back. I was about 3/4 of the way up when I felt it, fingers clawing at my ankle. He'd reached the dune. I kicked hard, sending sand into his face, and heard him curse. For a split second, his grip loosened, and I lunged forward, scrambling the last few feet to the top. As I crested the dune, I felt his fingernails rake down my calf, tearing my skin. I let out a yelp of pain, but didn't stop. I tumbled over the top of the dune and half slid, half fell down the boardwalk side. Without looking back, I got to my feet and ran. I ran like I've never run before or since. Along the boardwalk, past closed shops and empty benches, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but there was nothing, just the blood rushing in my ears and my own ragged breathing. I didn't stop until I reached our beach house. I slipped back through the sliding door, closed it behind me, and locked it. Then I dove into bed, still in my sandy clothes and scorched sneakers, and pulled the covers over my head. Sean came in about 20 minutes later with our cousins. He tried to talk to me, but I pretended to be asleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that partially burned photograph of the fake boy who looked like me. The next morning, I had a long red scratch down my right calf. Mom noticed it at breakfast and asked what happened. I told her I'd scraped it on a piece of driftwood while playing on the beach the day before. I was too afraid to tell the truth, not just because I'd sneaked out, but because I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite articulate, a fear that if I told, something worse might happen. I spent the rest of that vacation looking over my shoulder. I never went to the beach alone again that summer. I kept expecting to see the bald man, maybe walking down the boardwalk or watching our house from a distance, but I never did. Here's the thing that still bothers me the most. In the days that followed, there was nothing on the local news, no reports of missing children, no police activity on the beach, nothing. Life in Driftwood Bay continued as normal. The hurricane never hit. It changed course and went out to sea. And by the end of our vacation, the town had already started removing the sand dunes. I've gone back to Driftwood Bay many times since then. My grandparents still own the house, though they don't spend summers there anymore. I've walked that same stretch of beach as an adult, trying to pinpoint exactly where it happened. But everything looks different now. The dunes are gone, there are new buildings along the boardwalk, and the beach has changed shape after years of tides and storms. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if it was just some weird dream that my 8-year-old brain somehow convinced me was real. But then I look at the scar on my calf, a thin white line now, and I know it happened. I've never told anyone this story before, not my parents, not Sean, not even my wife. What would I say? Hey, I think I stumbled upon someone destroying evidence of something when I was a kid. It sounds crazy even to me, but I still think about that boy in the photo. Who was he? Why did he look like me? And what was the bald man trying to hide? I'll probably never know. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still smell the burning clothes and feel those fingernails clawing at my ankle. And I wonder what would have happened if he'd caught me. Story 13. I still can't believe what happened last week. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I keep replaying the events in my head over and over. I need to get this out. Maybe typing it will help me process everything. I'm part of a research team at the university studying urban ecology. There are 6 of us: myself, Dr. Melanie, our team lead, Carlos, Aisha, Trent, and Sophie. We're all environmental scientists specializing in different areas. My focus is on soil composition and how it changes with urban development. Last Tuesday was supposed to be a routine collection day. We planned to gather samples from Riverside Forest, which sits on the edge of the city. It's not some remote wilderness. You can literally see apartment buildings through the trees in some spots. We go there at least twice a month during research season. I've probably been there 50 times over the past 3 years. We met at the university parking lot around 8 in the morning. It was a beautiful day, sunny, about 70 degrees, perfect weather for fieldwork. We loaded our equipment into the department van: sample containers, testing kits, laptops, cameras, all the usual gear. We were wearing our typical field clothes: cargo pants, hiking boots, those moisture-wicking shirts that never seem to actually wick moisture. Nothing special. The drive to Riverside took about 20 minutes. We were all in good spirits, talking about weekend plans and some upcoming conference. It was completely normal. When we arrived, the parking lot had about 10 other cars, typical for a weekday morning. There were a few joggers, someone walking their dog, an older couple with binoculars, probably bird watching. We divvied up the equipment and headed to our designated collection sites. We were studying 3 different sections of the forest to compare soil and vegetation differences. I was paired with Aisha for the northeastern quadrant. Carlos and Sophie took the western section, and Dr. Melanie and Trent were handling the southern part. Aisha and I made our way about half a mile in, following the main trail before branching off onto a smaller path. We found our first collection point and started working. I was digging soil samples while Aisha photographed and cataloged the surrounding vegetation. We worked for about an hour, then moved to our second site another quarter-mile deeper into the woods. Around 11, we heard someone calling our names. It was Carlos, walking quickly toward us on the trail. He looked upset. "Dr. Melanie wants everyone to meet at Site C right away," he said, slightly out of breath. "What's going on?" I asked. "Something about changing the collection protocol." She sounded stressed. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off in his voice, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We packed up our immediate samples and followed Carlos through the woods. As we walked, the forest felt different somehow. Usually, these woods are peaceful. You can hear birds, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, the distant sounds of the city. But it seemed unusually quiet, almost like the forest was holding its breath. When we reached Site C, I immediately knew something was wrong. Dr. Melanie, Trent, and Sophie were standing stiffly in a small clearing. Their faces were pale. And then I saw them, 2 men standing slightly behind our colleagues. They looked so ordinary. That's what still gets me. One was maybe in his 30s, average height, wearing jeans and a dark blue windbreaker. The other was younger, early 20s probably, in a gray hoodie and khaki pants. They could have been anybody. Hikers, bird watchers, college students. Except the older one was holding a gun, pointed casually at Dr. Melanie's back. "Join your friends," the older one said to us. His voice was calm, conversational almost. My legs went numb. I remember looking at Aisha, who had frozen mid-step. Carlos gave us a slight nod, and we slowly moved toward the others. "That's better," the man said. "Now we're going to make this simple. We want everything you have: backpacks, equipment, wallets, phones, watches, jewelry, everything. Put it all on the ground in front of you." I couldn't believe this was happening. This wasn't some remote wilderness. We were less than 2 miles from a Starbucks. There were joggers and dog walkers all over these trails. How could we be getting robbed here? Dr. Melanie was the first to move. She slowly took off her backpack and placed it on the ground, then removed her watch and wedding ring. "Please," she said quietly, "take what you want, but some of this equipment contains irreplaceable research data." The younger man laughed. "Lady, we don't care about your bird-watching pictures or whatever. Just put everything down and shut up." One by one, we set our belongings on the ground. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unzip my backpack. Inside was my laptop with 3 months of unuploaded data, our department's high-resolution camera, soil testing equipment, my wallet with about $60, and my phone. Everything valuable I owned, basically. Sophie started to cry silently. Trent put his hand on her shoulder, but the younger robber immediately stepped forward. "Don't move," he snapped, suddenly aggressive. "Hands where we can see them." That's when Aisha started hyperventilating. I could see the panic attack coming on. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and she pressed her hand against her chest. I can't breathe," she gasped, starting to sway on her feet. "Shut her up," the older man hissed, waving the gun toward Aisha. "She's having a panic attack," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She needs to sit down and—" "I don't care what she needs," the man cut me off. "Get her under control or I will." Dr. Melanie slowly moved toward Aisha. "May I help her, please?" The men exchanged glances and the older one nodded curtly. Dr. Melanie guided Aisha to sit on the ground, murmuring quietly to her, coaching her through breathing exercises. I kept my eyes on the gun, which was now pointed vaguely in my direction. What still haunts me is what happened next. As we stood there, I noticed movement on the main trail about 30 yards away. A couple with hiking poles appeared, saw our situation, made eye contact with me, and then deliberately turned onto another path. They saw us, saw what was happening, and just left. It happened again a few minutes later. A jogger came around the bend, slowed down, clearly registered the scene. 6 frightened people with hands up, 2 men going through backpacks, and then quietly backed away and disappeared. No one called for help, no one intervened. They just vanished like ghosts. "On your knees, all of you," the older man ordered, while the younger one gathered our belongings into 2 large backpacks they'd brought. We knelt in the dirt, the pine needles dug into my knees. I remember staring at a small beetle crawling near my hand, thinking about how oblivious it was to our situation, how it would continue its little beetle life regardless of what happened to us. My mind latched onto that beetle like it was a lifeline to sanity. The younger man zipped up the backpacks, now bulging with our equipment. Over $6,000 worth of university property, not counting our personal items, our phones, our IDs, our keys, everything. "If any of you move in the next 10 minutes, we'll know," the older man said, backing away slowly. "We have friends watching the trails." I don't think they really did, but the threat worked. We stayed on our knees, hardly breathing as they disappeared into the forest. We could hear them crashing through the underbrush for a minute or two, and then silence. We stayed there for what felt like forever. Aisha was still struggling to breathe normally. Sophie was crying quietly. Trent was the first to stand after maybe 15 minutes. "I think they're gone," he said, his voice hoarse. Slowly, we got to our feet. My knees were numb, and I had to stamp my feet to get feeling back. Dr. Melanie was pale but composed. "Is everyone physically okay?" she asked, looking at each of us. We nodded mutely. "What do we do now?" Carlos asked. "They took our phones, our car keys." Dr. Melanie took a deep breath. "We walked back to the parking lot. There should be other people there. We'll have to borrow someone's phone to call the police and the university." The walk back was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. Every distant voice sounded like a threat. We huddled together like scared children, hyper-aware of our surroundings in a way I'd never experienced before. When we finally reached the parking lot, it was as if we'd emerged from another world. There were people getting in and out of cars, chatting, completely normal. A woman was changing her shoes by her trunk. A man was helping a child out of a car seat. Regular Tuesday activities while we were still shaking with fear. We approached an older man who was unloading a bicycle from his car rack. He looked startled when 6 disheveled, clearly distressed people approached him, but he let Dr. Melanie use his phone to call 911. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. They took our statements, radioed in descriptions, and even sent officers into the forest to search, though we all knew the robbers would be long gone. They drove us back to the university in their patrol cars. The whole way there, I kept looking out the window at the city passing by, at people going about their normal days, and feeling like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. The university administration was supportive. They arranged counseling sessions for all of us, helped us replace our IDs and keys, and worked with the police on the investigation. They even provided temporary phones and laptops so we could continue our work. But it's been a week, and none of our belongings have been recovered. The police said they rarely are in cases like this. The robbers probably sold the electronics immediately and ditched anything identifiable. What stays with me isn't the material loss, though. It's the realization of how quickly safety can shatter, how vulnerable we all are, even in places we consider secure, how dangerous ordinary-looking people can be, and most disturbingly, how other human beings saw our distress and chose to walk away. I haven't been back to the forest. I don't know if I ever will. The university has suspended fieldwork there indefinitely, assigning us to other research sites. But even in those new locations, I find myself constantly scanning for threats, jumping at unexpected sounds, distrusting strangers on the trails. Those men stole more than our equipment that day. They stole our sense of security, our trust in the goodness of others, our belief in the safety of familiar places. And I don't know if we'll ever get those things back. Story 14. I've been sitting here for almost an hour now, trying to figure out how to even start writing this down. My hands are still shaking a bit, and I keep glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I guess I should start by saying that what happened at our family cabin last month has completely changed me. I can't sleep without a light on anymore, and certain sounds, like footsteps above me or whispers in an empty room, send me into instant panic attacks. Our cabin in El Bosque, Patagonia, has been in the Martinez family since my great-grandfather built it in the 1930s. It's not much to look at these days. The wooden exterior has weathered to a dull gray. The front porch sags noticeably on one side, and the windows never seem clean no matter how much you scrub them. But it's ours, and we've spent every summer there for as long as I can remember. I'm 27 now, and I've probably spent a total of 4 or 5 years of my life in that place, if you add up all the summers. When I was a kid, I loved it, fishing in the nearby stream, hiking through the woods, roasting marshmallows in the ancient stone fireplace. As I got older, though, I started noticing things. We all did. But nobody really talked about it, you know? It was just part of being at the cabin. The cold spots were always the first thing you'd notice when arriving. No matter how sunny and warm it was outside, Certain rooms in the cabin, especially the small bedroom under the attic and the narrow hallway leading to the back door, would be freezing. My dad always said it was just poor insulation, but even in the middle of summer, you could see your breath in those spots sometimes. My cousin Lucia was the first one to mention the whispers. We were maybe 13 or 14 at the time, sharing the room under the attic, when she shook me awake in the middle of the night. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I listened, and sure enough, there was a faint murmuring sound coming from the attic above us. It wasn't like people talking, more like the sound of multiple voices all whispering at once, like the static between radio stations but with a rhythm to it. Dad checked the next morning and said it was probably just mice, but we never found any evidence of rodents. Then there were the footsteps. You'd be alone in the cabin, maybe everyone else went into town for supplies, and suddenly hear the unmistakable sound of someone walking across the floor upstairs. Heavy steps, like a man in work boots. They'd cross from one side of the ceiling to the other, pause, and then walk back. Sometimes they'd stop right above wherever you were standing, as if whoever or whatever was up there knew exactly where you were. My Uncle Gabriel spent thousands of pesos having the electrical system completely redone after the lights kept flickering, but it didn't help. Sometimes all the lights in the house would dim simultaneously, then brighten again, like the whole place was breathing. But what happened last month was different. It wasn't just the usual weirdness. It was like whatever had been watching us all these years finally decided to reveal itself. It started the day after we arrived. My parents, my brother Mateo, and I had driven down from Buenos Aires for our annual 2-week stay. The cabin had been empty since my aunt and uncle used it at Easter, and it had that musty, closed-up smell that always takes a day or two to air out. That first night was normal enough. We unpacked, cleaned up a bit, made dinner on the old stove that always takes forever to heat up. I was scrolling through my phone before bed, annoyed at the terrible signal, when I noticed something odd. Despite having barely any reception, my phone battery was draining incredibly fast. It went from 80% to 20% in less than an hour, even though I wasn't doing anything battery intensive. And the phone was getting hot. Not warm, like when you've been using it a lot, but actually hot to the touch. I didn't think much of it and plugged it into charge before going to sleep in my usual room, the small one under the attic. I've always hated that room, but as the youngest, I usually get stuck with it. The air in there is always heavy somehow, like there's not quite enough oxygen. I woke up around 3 in the morning, freezing cold despite the heavy blankets. My phone was unplugged and sitting on the nightstand, even though I distinctly remembered plugging it in. The battery was completely dead. I tried to plug it back in, but it wouldn't charge. That's when I noticed the smell. It's hard to describe, like wet earth and something metallic, almost like blood, but not quite. And underneath that, something sickly sweet, like fruit that started to rot. The smell seemed to be coming from the ceiling, from the attic. I've never liked going up to the attic. None of us do. It's accessed by a narrow staircase behind a door at the end of the upstairs hallway. The door doesn't have a proper knob, just an old iron latch that's always ice cold to the touch. The stairs themselves creak horribly, and the attic itself is just one big open space with rough wooden floors and exposed beams. There are a few small windows, but they're so caked with decades of grime that barely any light gets through. My great-grandfather supposedly used it for storage, but there's nothing up there now except an old trunk that nobody has opened in years and a couple of broken chairs. At least that's what's supposed to be up there. I haven't actually been in the attic since I was 12. when I went up on a dare from Mateo and came racing back down after less than a minute, unable to explain why I was so terrified. I tried to go back to sleep, pulling the blankets over my head to block out the smell, but it was useless. I could hear the whispering again, clearer than I'd ever heard it before. It still wasn't quite intelligible, but it sounded urgent, almost angry. Then the footsteps started, not above me this time, but in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate steps that paused right outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to turn. It didn't, but something worse happened. A shadow appeared in the crack under the door, blocking the faint light from the hallway. Someone, or something, was standing right outside. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my voice wouldn't work. The shadow remained for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, and then it slowly moved away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I tried to tell my parents about what happened, but they brushed it off like they always do. "It's an old house. It makes noises," my dad said with a shrug. My mom was a little more sympathetic, but suggested I was just having a nightmare. Mateo, however, looked concerned. Later, when our parents were outside, he admitted that he'd been experiencing strange things too. "My laptop battery drained completely last night, even though it was at full charge when I went to bed," he said. "And I keep feeling like I'm being watched, like I'll be sitting somewhere and I'll suddenly get this feeling that someone is standing right behind me, but when I turn around, there's nothing." That day, we decided to video chat with our cousins who were coming to join us the following week. As soon as the call connected, the weirdest thing happened. The image froze for a second, and when it came back, there was clearly a dark figure standing behind Mateo. I could see it on my screen, a tall, shadowy silhouette with what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. I gasped and pointed, but when Mateo turned around, there was nothing there. Our cousins saw it too, though. They were asking what was behind him. When we played back the recorded call later, the figure was clearly visible for about 3 seconds before the image distorted with static and then returned to normal. But the most disturbing part was the audio. Underneath our conversation, you could hear heavy, labored breathing, like someone was standing right next to the microphone. That night, things escalated. We'd all gone to bed around 11, and I was lying awake, too scared to sleep, when I heard my mom scream from her and Dad's bedroom across the hall. I jumped up and ran to their room, meeting Mateo in the hallway. Mom was sitting up in bed, pointing at the corner of the room, her face pale with terror. Dad was trying to calm her down. "There was someone standing right there," she insisted, her voice shaking. "I woke up and he was just standing there, watching us." Dad turned on every light and checked the entire house, but of course there was no one. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. After that, none of us slept much. The next morning, we noticed something that sent chills down my spine. The keys to the cabin, which my dad always leaves on the kitchen counter, were hanging from a hook in the living room. A hook that's been empty for years because it's too high for any of us to reach comfortably. When we asked Dad about it, he swore he hadn't moved them. It continued like this for days. Objects would disappear and reappear in different places. All our electronic devices would drain completely overnight, no matter how much charge they had when we went to bed. The temperature in the house fluctuated wildly. One minute you'd be sweating, the next shivering. But the worst was the attic. The sounds from up there were getting louder and more frequent. Not just whispers now, but occasionally what sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Once, in the middle of the afternoon, we all heard what sounded like a child laughing. followed by a thump so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. After a week of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was in the attic. I waited until everyone was occupied. Mom and Dad were preparing lunch, and Mateo was taking a shower. Then I quietly made my way upstairs to the attic door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the iron latch. It was freezing cold as usual, but this time it felt like it was somehow pushing back against my touch, as if it didn't want to be opened. I had to use both hands to force it down. The door swung open with a long, agonized creak that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. The narrow staircase stretched up into darkness. I took out my phone to use as a flashlight, but of course it was dead again, even though I'd charged it that morning. I almost turned back then, but something compelled me forward. I took a deep breath and started climbing the stairs, wincing at every creak and groan of the old wood. The air got colder with every step, and that smell, earth and metal and rot, grew stronger. I was shivering by the time I reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the attic. It was darker than it should have been in the middle of the day. The windows, filthy as they were, should have let in some light, but it was like the darkness up here was something physical, something that pushed back against the light. I could make out the shapes of the old trunk and broken chairs, exactly where they'd always been. But there was something else too. A tall figure standing in the far corner of the attic, almost blending into the shadows. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't move either, but I had the distinct impression it was looking right at me. Then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed toward the trunk. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I was too terrified to move, or maybe some part of me needed to know what was in that trunk. I took a step toward it, then another. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the sound impossibly loud in the heavy silence. The trunk wasn't locked. The lid was heavy, but it lifted easily enough. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers, what looked like old photographs, and something wrapped in a faded cloth. I picked up one of the photos. It showed a group of people standing in front of the cabin, but the cabin looked new, the wood still bright. The people were dressed in clothes from maybe the 1920s or 30s. There was something off about their faces. They all looked tense, uncomfortable. All except one man who stood slightly apart from the group, his face blurred as if he'd moved just as the photo was taken. I set the photo aside and picked up the cloth-wrapped object. It was heavy, solid. As I began to unwrap it, the temperature in the attic plummeted. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The cloth fell away to reveal an old iron box about the size of a book. There was no obvious way to open it, no latch or keyhole. But as I turned it over in my hands, I felt something shift inside. That's when I heard it, a voice, clear as day, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." I dropped the box and spun around, but there was no one there. The dark figure in the corner was gone too. I grabbed the box and ran for the stairs, nearly falling in my haste to get out of the attic. I slammed the door behind me and ran straight into Mateo, who was coming to look for me. "What the hell?" he said, steadying me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak, just held out the iron box with shaking hands. Mateo took it, his expression changing from concern to something else as he felt the weight of it. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. I told him about the attic, the figure, everything. He didn't look skeptical like I expected. Instead, he looked afraid. "We need to open this," he said finally. We took the box downstairs to the kitchen, where my parents were finishing preparing lunch. Mom took one look at the box and dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. I explained again, and to my surprise, my dad didn't dismiss it. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, his face pale. "I've seen it too," he admitted. "The figure in the attic. I thought I was imagining things." We spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to open the box. It had no visible seams or openings, but something was definitely inside. You could hear it move when you shook the box. Eventually, Dad tried heating it over the stove, thinking maybe the metal would expand enough to reveal a seam, and that's when everything went crazy. The moment the box started to get hot, all the lights in the cabin went out. Not just the electric lights. The daylight coming through the windows seemed to dim too, like a cloud had passed over the sun. But when I looked outside, the sky was clear. The smell from the attic was suddenly everywhere, overwhelming. And then we started hearing the noises, footsteps, dozens of them, running back and forth upstairs. Doors throughout the house began slamming open and closed. The temperature dropped so fast that frost actually formed on the inside of the windows. And through it all, the whispering grew louder and louder until it wasn't whispering anymore, but voices, many voices, all talking at once. We couldn't make out words, but the tone was angry, threatening. Dad dropped the box, which had become painfully hot. It hit the floor with a heavy thud and rolled under the table. Immediately, everything stopped. The noises, the cold, the voices. The lights flickered back on. The air cleared. We looked at each other in shock, no one speaking for a long moment. Then Mom broke the silence. "We need to put it back," she said firmly. "We need to put it back and never touch it again." We all agreed. I took the box, now cool to the touch again, back up to the attic and placed it exactly where I'd found it, rewrapping it in the cloth and returning it to the trunk. The dark figure wasn't there, but the entire time I was in the attic, I could feel eyes watching me. We left the cabin the next day, cutting our vacation short by almost a week. None of us has spoken much about what happened, but I know we're all thinking about it. The strangest part? Despite how terrified I was, part of me feels drawn back to the cabin, back to that attic, like whatever's there isn't finished with us yet. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment back in Buenos Aires, I swear I can hear whispering coming from the empty room next door and smell that distinctive scent of earth and metal and decay. Story 15. I've been driving trucks for nearly 12 years now. Long hauls, short hauls, dangerous routes, easy routes. I've pretty much seen it all, or at least I thought I had until 3 months ago. I still get cold sweats thinking about it. I was hauling industrial equipment from Denver to Salt Lake. Not my usual route, but the money was good and I needed the work. About 6 hours into the drive, I got a notification on my GPS that there was a jackknifed semi blocking the main highway. The detour took me onto this narrow mountain road that wasn't even on my regular maps, Keller Pass, according to the only sign I saw. The detour added nearly 2 hours to my drive time, and I was already pushing my limit. Around 11 at night, I knew I couldn't make it to the next rest stop safely. My eyes were getting heavy, and I was starting to see those phantom shapes on the road that tell you you're too tired to keep driving. I'd been yawning for about 20 miles, and my 4th cup of coffee wasn't doing anything anymore. I looked for a good spot to pull over. There wasn't much, just a narrow shoulder with a guardrail separating the road from a steep drop on one side and dense forest on the other. By my calculation, I was at least 40 miles from the nearest real town. The GPS showed nothing but wilderness. I finally found a slightly wider section where I could pull my rig completely off the road and still have a couple feet of clearance from passing vehicles. Not that there were any. I hadn't seen headlights for over an hour. I did my usual safety checks, locked the doors, and climbed into the sleeper berth. I remember checking my phone before turning in. No signal out here, of course. I set my alarm for 6 hours and tried to get comfortable. The darkness out there was something else. No streetlights, no distant glow of a town, nothing. Just pitch black outside the windows of my cab. The kind of darkness that makes you realize how alone you really are. I'm used to sleeping in my truck, but something about the isolation made me uneasy. Still, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off around midnight. I woke up suddenly, disoriented, heart already beating fast before I even knew why. The digital clock on my dashboard read 3:34 a.m. Something had woken me up. A noise, I realized. Not the normal creaks and settling sounds my truck makes. This was different. I stayed completely still, listening. There it was again, a metallic clicking or scraping sound coming from behind the cab, where my tractor connects to the trailer. It sounded like someone fiddling with the air lines or electrical cables. My first thought was that I was being robbed, maybe someone trying to steal my cargo. But out here, miles from anywhere, it didn't make sense. Then I thought maybe it was an animal, a bear or something that had wandered out of the forest. I've had bears investigate my truck before in remote areas. I was about to reach for my flashlight when I felt the entire truck shift slightly. Something heavy had just climbed onto the landing at the back of my cab. This wasn't a small animal. Whatever it was had to weigh at least 200 or 300 pounds from the way my rig moved. I could hear the metal groaning under the weight. My heart was racing now. I had a split-second decision to make. If it was a bear, I needed to scare it away before it tried to get inside somehow. If it was a person with bad intentions, I needed to show them I was awake and alert. I did what seemed logical at the time. I balled up my fist and slammed it hard against the wall of the cab 3 times. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet night. "Hey!" I shouted. "Get off my truck!" What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. There was a scream, not an animal sound, a human scream. But not normal. It was this high-pitched, blood-curdling sound that didn't even sound fully human. It was like someone trying to imitate a human scream, but not quite getting it right. It had this weird vibrato quality that made my hair stand on end. I heard a heavy thud as whatever it was fell or jumped off my truck. Then, and this is the part that really freaked me out, voices, multiple voices, all around my truck, shouting to each other. "Contact made! Position 3, move in! Secure the perimeter!" I was in full panic mode now. I scrambled up to the front seat, fumbling for the keys I'd left in the ignition. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn them. I hit the headlights and high beams at the same time, flooding the area in front of my truck with light. What I saw didn't make sense at first. There were people, at least 6 or 7 of them, surrounding my truck. They were dressed in full tactical gear, helmets, night vision goggles pushed up on their foreheads, desert camo uniforms. They were carrying rifles, but they weren't pointing them at me. They looked as startled as I felt. One of them approached the driver's side door, holding up his hand in what seemed like a calming gesture. I was not feeling calm. I had my hand on the door lock, debating whether to roll down the window or just drive off with whoever was still hanging onto my truck. "Sir, please stay calm," the guy was yelling through the glass. "We're U.S. military. This is a training exercise. There's been a misunderstanding." I was breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. I cracked the window about an inch. "What the hell are you doing to my truck?" I managed to yell back. The guy looked genuinely apologetic. He was young, maybe mid-20s. "Sir, we're with the Army Reserve. We're conducting a midnight training exercise in this area. We were tasked with locating and securing an abandoned truck. We thought this was our target vehicle." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Abandoned? Does this look abandoned to you? I'm sleeping in here." "I understand, sir. There's been a mistake. Our target vehicle is supposed to be about 3 miles further down this road. It's a decoy set up for our exercise. Someone misread the coordinates." By now, the others had gathered closer. They'd slung their rifles and were standing in a loose semicircle. One of them, who had stripes on his sleeve indicating he was a sergeant or something, stepped forward. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for the disturbance. We had faulty intel on the location. Our spotter didn't verify that the truck was unoccupied before we approached." I was still trying to calm down, my heart hammering in my chest. "One of you was on my truck. I heard you fall off when I yelled." The soldiers exchanged glances. The sergeant spoke again. "That would be Private Mercer. He was assigned to check the coupling between the cab and trailer as part of the exercise." A tall, lanky soldier stepped forward, looking embarrassed. "That was me, sir. Sorry about that. You startled me when you banged on the wall. I didn't expect anyone to be in there." "You screamed," I said flatly. "That wasn't a normal scream." The private looked confused. I guess I was surprised, sir. Don't remember exactly what noise I made." Something felt off about his response, but my fear was gradually being replaced by annoyance. The sergeant was speaking into a radio now, presumably explaining the situation to whoever was in charge of this clusterfuck of an operation. "We've confirmed our target is at coordinates Charlie 7, not Delta 3. Current position has a civilian truck driver. Please advise all teams to verify Charlie 7 location." "Yes, sir." "Understood." He turned back to me. "Sir, I've notified command. No other units will approach your vehicle. Our target is further down the road, as I mentioned." I looked at them all skeptically. They certainly looked like legitimate military personnel, but something still felt wrong. "You guys do these exercises on public roads, in the middle of the night?" "This area is within our designated training zone, sir. We try to use less traveled routes to minimize civilian contact. This detour route isn't normally active except during main highway closures." I nodded slowly, still not entirely convinced, but not seeing many other explanations. "Well, I'd appreciate it if you'd move on and let me get back to sleep. I've got a long drive tomorrow." The sergeant nodded. "Absolutely, sir. Again, we apologize for the disturbance." He turned to his team. "Move out. Charlie 7. They started to disperse, heading back into the darkness beyond my headlights. The private who had been on my truck lingered for a moment, staring at me through the window with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he turned and jogged after the others. I sat there for a long time, listening as their footsteps faded away. When I couldn't hear them anymore, I got out and did a thorough check of my truck and trailer. Nothing was damaged or missing. The connections between the cab and trailer looked normal. I climbed back in and locked the doors again, but I didn't return to the sleeper berth. I sat in the driver's seat until dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the encounter. What bothers me most, even now, is that scream. It keeps coming back to me in my dreams. I've heard people scream in surprise or fear before. It didn't sound like that. And why would trained military personnel scream like that anyway? They're supposed to be disciplined, especially during exercises. The other thing that nags at me is that when I checked online later for information about military training in that area, I couldn't find anything. I even called a recruiting office and asked about Army Reserve training exercises on Keller Pass. The person I spoke to had no idea what I was talking about. Maybe it was legitimate and just not publicized. Maybe it was classified in some way. But sometimes, when I'm driving a lonely road at night, I can't help wondering what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. What were they really doing with my truck? And that scream wasn't right. I've never heard anything like it before or since, and I hope I never do again. Story 16. I still can't shake what happened at Chingasa Lagoon last September. It's been 8 months, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear that humming again. I've only told this story to my immediate family, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. It was my 26th birthday, right in the middle of the strictest COVID lockdown when we weren't supposed to be going anywhere. I was feeling pretty down about spending another birthday cooped up in my apartment when my friend Daniela suggested we do something crazy. She knew I loved hiking and had been talking about visiting Chingasa National Reserve for years, so she proposed we make a day trip of it, just the 4 of us, me, Daniela, my roommate Carlos, and his girlfriend Lucia. The problem was that the park was officially closed due to COVID restrictions. Daniela, always the risk taker, said she knew a back entrance where local farmers sometimes entered without paying the fee. Normally, I wouldn't break rules like this, but after months of isolation, I was desperate for adventure. We left Bogota at 5 in the morning while it was still dark. Carlos drove his old Jeep up winding mountain roads for almost 3 hours. The higher we climbed, the worse the weather got. Thick fog and a steady, cold rain. I remember thinking maybe this was a sign we should turn back. "This is a terrible idea," Lucia said when we reached the spot where Daniela said we could enter. The rain was coming down harder, and visibility was maybe 15 feet at most. "We're going to get soaked, possibly lost, and probably catch pneumonia on your birthday." I almost agreed with her until Daniela pulled out 4 plastic ponchos and a bottle of aguardiente from her backpack. "For warmth," she said with a wink, passing the bottle around. The burn of the liquor gave me just enough courage to say, "Let's do this." We followed a narrow trail that wound through dense paramo vegetation, those weird, tall frailejon plants that look like they belong on another planet. Everything was wet and muddy, our shoes sinking into the soft earth with each step. The fog was so dense I could barely see Carlos walking a few steps ahead of me. The only sounds were our labored breathing in the thin mountain air and the constant dripping of water from every surface. After about an hour of hiking, I was starting to regret the whole thing. My birthday adventure was turning into a cold, wet misery. Then something strange happened. The trail started to descend slightly, and suddenly the fog began to thin. Within 50 steps, we emerged into what seemed like a completely different world. Ahead of us was Chingasa Lagoon, a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains. But here's the weird part. There was no rain or fog over the lagoon. It was like we'd stepped through some invisible barrier. Looking back, I could see the storm clouds hanging heavy over the trail we'd just walked. But above the lagoon, there was actually blue sky peeking through. "What the hell?" Carlos said, looking around in confusion. Daniela didn't seem surprised. "The local guides call it the bubble. They say the lagoon sometimes creates its own microclimate, something about the way the mountains surround it." It was weird, but I was just relieved to be out of the rain. We found a relatively dry patch of ground near the shore and set up our little birthday picnic. Sandwiches, chips, more aguardiente, and a small cake Lucia had somehow managed to protect in her backpack. The lagoon was hauntingly beautiful. The water was so still it looked solid, like polished obsidian. The mountains reflected perfectly on its surface, creating a disorienting mirror effect. I remember feeling like I could step onto that reflection and walk across to the other side. We sang Happy Birthday, and I blew out the single candle Lucia had brought. Then we heard it. At first it seemed like an echo of our singing, bouncing back from across the water. But as our voices stopped, the sound continued. It was humming, a woman humming a melody I didn't recognize, but somehow felt I should know. "Who's that?" I asked, looking around. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Probably other hikers," Carlos suggested, but his voice was uncertain. "There's nobody else here," Lucia said, scanning the shoreline. "And the park is closed, remember?" The humming continued, soft but clear, like someone was standing right next to us. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up despite the thermal shirt I was wearing. That's when I saw her. At the edge of the water, maybe 100 yards away, stood a woman in a black dress. She was just standing there, facing the lagoon, perfectly still. Her long, dark hair hung down her back, contrasting sharply with her pale skin. "Do you see that woman?" I whispered to the others, not taking my eyes off her. "What woman?" Carlos asked, squinting in the direction I was looking. "There, by the water's edge," I pointed. "In the black dress." "I don't see anyone," he said. "I see her," Daniela said quietly. There was something in her voice that made my stomach drop, a kind of resigned recognition. Lucia stood up for a better look. "I don't see anyone either." The fact that only Daniela and I could see her made everything so much worse. I wasn't imagining it. Daniela saw her too. But something was very wrong. I remembered something then that made my blood run cold. 2 years earlier, I'd visited a different part of the reserve with my father. We'd seen a woman in a black dress walking along the shore of another lagoon. My father had pointed her out, commenting on how strange it was to see someone dressed so formally in a national park. I'd forgotten about it until this moment. "I've seen her before," I said, my voice barely audible. The humming grew louder. It was a mournful tune, like a lullaby but somehow twisted, minor notes where there should be major ones. Though the woman's back was to us, I knew it was coming from her. "We need to leave," Daniela said suddenly, already packing up our things. "Now!" No one argued. We shoved everything haphazardly into our backpacks, abandoning the remains of my birthday cake on the ground. As we prepared to leave, I couldn't help looking back at the woman. She had turned around. I couldn't make out her features clearly at that distance, but something about her face seemed wrong, like it wasn't fully formed. And she was looking directly at us. No, not at us, at me. I felt a horrible sense of recognition, like seeing an old acquaintance who'd been gone a long time but whom you never particularly liked. My heart was hammering in my chest. "Don't look at her." Daniela grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "Just walk." We hurried back toward the trail, and the moment we stepped into the fog again, the humming stopped abruptly. The rain seemed heavier now, coming down in sheets, but I barely noticed it. I was too busy trying to process what I'd just seen. We hiked in silence for about 20 minutes before Carlos spoke. What the hell was that all about? There wasn't anyone there. There was, I insisted. Daniela saw her too. Daniela nodded, her face unusually pale. "I saw someone, yes." "Well, I didn't see anyone," Lucia said, "but I definitely heard that humming. It was like it was inside my head." We continued walking, The only sounds are footsteps and the relentless rain. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it a park ranger? A local? But why couldn't Carlos and Lucia see her? About halfway back to the car, Carlos suddenly stopped, walking. We all bumped into each other like a cartoon. He turned to face us, water streaming down his face from his soaked hood. "Daniela," he said, his voice strangely calm. "What did you see back there?" "Exactly." Daniela hesitated, glancing at me. "A woman in a black dress by the water." "What else?" Carlos pressed. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Her feet," he said. "Did you see her feet?" The question was so unexpected it took me a moment to process. I tried to recall the image of the woman, to remember if I'd seen her feet. I hadn't. The black dress reached the ground, hiding them. Daniela's face went even paler. "No," she whispered. "I didn't see her feet." Carlos nodded slowly, as if confirming something. "My grandmother grew up in a village near here. She used to tell stories about La Dama del Lago, the Lady of the Lake. She's supposed to be the ghost of a woman who drowned in one of the lagoons centuries ago. According to the legend, she appears to people who are going to—" He trailed off. "Going to what?" I demanded. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It's just a stupid legend." But there was something in his eyes that told me he believed it was more than that. "Carlos," I insisted. "Going to what?" He sighed. "People who are going to face a significant change or loss. Sometimes it's death, sometimes it's something else. The point is, the stories always say the same thing. She has no feet. She floats above the ground." A cold that had nothing to do with the rain seeped into my bones. I hadn't seen her feet, and apparently neither had Daniela. But was that because she didn't have any, or simply because the dress covered them? "That's ridiculous," Lucia said. "Ghost stories to scare children. If there was a woman there, she was just a hiker like us." "Then why couldn't you see her?" Daniela asked quietly. No one had an answer for that. The rest of the hike back to the car was silent, except for the rain and our breathing. My birthday adventure had turned into something I couldn't explain, something that left me feeling deeply unsettled. When we reached the car, soaked and exhausted, Carlos pulled me aside while the girls got in. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "There's one more thing about the legend my grandmother told me. The humming, it's supposed to be the song she was singing when she drowned. And they say if you recognize the melody, it means you've heard it in a dream you had the night before someone close to you died." I felt sick. The melody had seemed familiar, like something I should know but couldn't quite place. "It's just a stupid superstition," he added quickly, seeing my face. "Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget, and I still can't. Nothing bad happened after our visit. No deaths, no significant losses, at least not yet. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that humming again, just on the edge of sleep. And sometimes, in the moment between dreaming and waking, I think I see a woman in a black dress standing at the foot of my bed, her face a blur, her feet hidden by the darkness. I haven't been back to Chingasa since. I don't think I ever will, but I can't stop wondering about that woman by the lagoon, and why only Daniela and I could see her. Most of all, I wonder why, when I saw her turn and look at me, I felt like she was welcoming me back to somewhere I'd never been. Story 17. I still get chills typing this out, even though it happened 11 years ago when I was 14. I've tried therapy, medication, even those breathing exercises they teach you for panic attacks, but nothing erases the memory of that night. Nothing. I lived with my mom in this shabby little house in Millfield. It wasn't much: peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and this really creepy basement with a frosted glass door that always felt like it was watching me. Dad had moved out years earlier, couldn't handle Mom's drinking anymore. I couldn't either, but I didn't have a choice. That night, February 12th, Mom had gone out drinking again. She'd promised to be back by 10, but it was now almost 3 in the morning, and I was alone. I'd fallen asleep watching TV on the couch, waiting up for her like I always did. The house made all these weird noises when it was empty, and I hated being there by myself, especially at night. I woke up suddenly at exactly 2:43. I remember looking at the clock on the DVD player. At first I thought Mom had come home, but then I realized the sound wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the basement. Thud, pause, thud, pause. It was rhythmic, deliberate, not like the random creaks and groans the house usually made. My first thought was that maybe a raccoon or something had gotten trapped down there. We'd had problems with animals before. I sat up, wrapping my blanket around my shoulders. The living room was dark except for the blue glow from the TV, which was playing some infomercial with the sound turned down low. I clicked it off, plunging the room into darkness. Thud, pause, thud, pause. I called out, "Mom?" My voice sounded tiny and pathetic even to my own ears. I knew she wasn't home, but maybe she'd come in the back way and was stumbling around in the basement. It wouldn't be the first time. No answer, just another thud. Then a scraping sound. Something cold settled in my stomach. That wasn't my mom. That wasn't an animal. Someone was trying to get in. Our basement had this outside entrance with concrete steps leading down from the backyard. The door was old, and the lock was flimsy. Mom had been saying for months she was going to get it fixed, but she never did. I slid off the couch, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I should call the police, I thought. But the house phone was in the kitchen, right next to the basement door. I'd have to get close to whatever was making that noise. The thuds were getting louder, more insistent. I crept toward the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum floor. The basement door had this frosted glass panel that glowed faintly from the streetlight outside. And through it, I could see a dark silhouette, a man's silhouette. I froze, watching as the shadow moved against the glass. He was doing something to the lock. I heard a faint metallic scratching, then a click. The door handle turned. I don't know what happened next, but I felt this warm wetness spreading down my legs. I'd wet myself. I was wearing these stupid pink pajama pants with little hearts on them, and they were soaked. I was so terrified I couldn't even move, couldn't even breathe. The door swung open slowly. Cold air rushed in from the basement. The man stepped inside, a tall shadow against the dimness. He didn't see me at first. I was standing perfectly still, pressed against the wall in the darkest part of the kitchen. He turned his head, looking around, then reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a phone or a walkie-talkie, I couldn't tell. "We're good," he whispered into it. "Front door." My brain finally kicked into gear. He had friends outside. They were coming in. I had to hide. I backed away as silently as I could, then turned and half crawled, half ran to the basement door. It was my only escape route now. I slipped through and down the stairs, trying not to make a sound. The basement was pitch black and smelled like mildew and old laundry. Mom stored all kinds of junk down there, boxes of Dad's stuff she never returned, old furniture, Christmas decorations. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, trying to control my breathing. I could hear footsteps above me now. More than one person. They were inside my house. "Check upstairs," a voice said. Kid's supposed to be here somewhere. They knew about me. They knew I was home alone. The thought made me want to throw up. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming up to the main floor. Then the front door opened and more people came in. I counted at least 3 different voices. "Place is a dump," someone said. "Just find the kid and let's get this over with," another voice answered. I was shaking so hard the boxes around me were rattling slightly. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. I was sitting in wet pajamas, terrified out of my mind, listening to strangers search my house for me. Then I remembered the house phone. If I could reach it, I could call for help. The phone was on a little table just outside the basement door. If I was fast enough, if they were all upstairs or in another part of the house, I crawled out from behind the boxes and made my way to the basement stairs. Each step creaked so loudly, it felt like a gunshot in the silence. I stopped every few seconds, listening. I could hear them moving around upstairs, opening doors, talking quietly. At the top of the stairs, I pressed my ear against the door. I couldn't hear anyone in the kitchen. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and opened the door just enough to peek through. The kitchen was empty. The phone was right there, just a few feet away. I slipped out and lunged for it, my wet pajamas making a soft squelching sound against the floor. I grabbed the receiver and punched in 911 with trembling fingers, then crouched down below the counter, the cord stretching taut. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice sounded impossibly loud. Please, help, I whispered. There are men in my house. I'm alone. Please. Hey! A shout from the living room. The phone! I looked up to see one of the men pointing at the phone cord, which led straight to my hiding spot. Our eyes met for one horrible second. I dropped the phone and bolted back to the basement, slamming the door behind me. I heard pounding footsteps and then someone yanked the door open. I was already halfway down the stairs, terror giving me speed I didn't know I had. "She's in the basement," the man shouted. I heard him start down the stairs after me. I dove behind a large cabinet, squeezing myself into the gap between it and the wall. There was an old blanket draped over some boxes nearby. I grabbed it and pulled it over me, trying to make myself as small as possible. The basement light flicked on, harsh and sudden. I could see dust particles floating in the beam through a tiny hole in the blanket. "Come out, kid," the man called. His voice was trying to sound friendly, but there was an edge to it that made my skin crawl. "We're not gonna hurt you. We just need to talk to your mom." I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I heard his footsteps moving around the basement, getting closer to my hiding spot. Then, suddenly, there was a loud thud followed by a crash and a cry of pain. "Shit!" another voice called from upstairs. "Mike, you okay?" No answer. I peeked out from under the blanket. The man, Mike apparently, was lying at the bottom of the stairs, not moving. He'd slipped in the puddle of urine I'd left at the top of the stairs and fallen all the way down, hitting his head on the banister. I heard sirens in the distance. The 911 operator must have sent help even though I'd dropped the phone. "Cops!" one of the men upstairs shouted. "Let's go!" I heard scrambling, the front door opening and closing. The sirens were getting louder. With my heart in my throat, I crept out from my hiding place. The man at the bottom of the stairs was still unconscious, a dark stain spreading from beneath his head. For one horrible moment, I thought he was dead, but then I saw his chest rising and falling. The basement door to the backyard was still unlocked from when they'd broken in. I pushed it open and ran out into the cold night air, not caring about my wet pajamas or my bare feet. I ran straight to my neighbor Mr. Keller's house, pounding on his door until his porch light came on. The police arrived minutes later. They, Found all 3 men, one unconscious in my basement, the other 2 trying to escape in a van parked down the street. They also found zip ties, duct tape, and a notebook with addresses and names, including mine and my mom's. It turned out they'd been targeting houses where they knew kids would be alone. They'd been watching our place, knew my mom's drinking habits, knew when I'd be by myself. The thought of that, of being watched and studied like prey, still makes me feel sick. They found my mom at some bar across town, too drunk to even understand what had happened. That night was the last straw. Child Protective Services took me away, and 2 weeks later, I was living with my dad 2 states away. The men went to prison, I went to therapy. Mom went to rehab, then relapsed, then went back to rehab. I haven't spoken to her in years. I'm 25 now. I have an apartment on the 3rd floor of my building, no basements. I have 3 locks on my door and a security system. I sleep with a baseball bat next to my bed. But I still have nightmares about that frosted glass door, about the shadow on the other side, about the voice saying, "Find the kid." I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear thuds coming from below. I still can't be alone in a house at night without checking the locks over and over. And I'll never forget how it felt to realize that the monsters aren't just in stories. They're real people who watch and wait for a 14-year-old girl to be left alone by her mother, who should have protected her. Story 18. I'm still not sure if I should even be writing this. My wife thinks it'll help me process things, and maybe she's right. It's been 3 weeks since our honeymoon in New Zealand, and I still wake up in cold sweats, thinking about what happened at that resort. For background, Sophia and I got married last month after 5 years together. We'd been saving up for this trip to New Zealand for ages. 2 weeks, driving a camper van around both islands, hiking, sightseeing, the whole deal. Neither of us are big on luxury hotels. We wanted adventure, to see the country properly. About a week into our trip, we were on the South Island driving along the west coast. The weather had turned nasty, pouring rain, winds so strong they were pushing our little camper around on the road. We'd planned to make it to a camping spot near Fox Glacier, but by late afternoon we were both exhausted and still hours away. "Let's just find somewhere to stop for tonight," Sophia suggested, scrolling through her phone. "There's a holiday park about 20 minutes ahead with cabins. They've got availability." I was more than ready to stop driving. The windshield wipers were barely keeping up with the downpour, and my shoulders ached from tensing against the wheel. So we pulled into this place called Westwood Forest Lodge around 5 in the evening. The resort was tucked back in a dense forest of native trees, huge ferns and these massive trees with twisted trunks. The rain made everything look darker, more enclosed. The main office was in this old wooden building with a wraparound porch. Inside, a guy about 60 with a weathered face and a thick Kiwi accent checked us in. "You're in cabin 7, he said, handing us a key. An actual metal key, not a key card. "Kitchen's open till 8 if you want dinner. Laundry facilities are in the small building behind the office. Help yourself." Our cabin was about a 5-minute walk from the main building, down a gravel path with solar lights marking the way. It was small but cozy, a queen bed, tiny bathroom, kitchenette, and a porch with 2 chairs facing the forest. The rain hammered on the metal roof, and honestly, after a week in the camper van, it felt like a luxury hotel to us. After settling in, we realized we were running out of clean clothes. We'd been so busy enjoying ourselves that laundry had fallen to the bottom of our priority list. "I'll take care of it," I told Sophia, gathering our dirty clothes into a mesh bag we'd brought. She'd been reading this thriller she was really into and looked comfortable curled up on the bed. "You sure?" she asked, already turning a page. "Yeah, no problem. You relax. I'll be back in an hour or so." It was around 7:30 when I headed to the laundry building. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but everything was soaked and dripping. The forest around the cabins was dense enough that even during daylight, it was dim under the canopy. Now, with evening setting in, it was downright gloomy. The laundry building was exactly where the manager had said, a small wooden structure behind the main office. It looked older than the cabins, with green paint peeling from the weatherboards. A single bulb lit the concrete path leading to its door. Inside, there were 4 washing machines along one wall, 4 dryers on the opposite, a folding table in the middle, and a small bench near the door. The lighting was fluorescent and buzzed intermittently. No windows except for a small one high up on the back wall. The place smelled like detergent and something mustier underneath, damp wood or old pipes maybe. I loaded 2 machines with our clothes, added the powder detergent provided in dispensers, and sat down on the bench to wait. I'd brought my phone to kill time, but had forgotten my headphones, so I just scrolled through photos we'd taken so far on our trip. About 15 minutes in, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. The door pushed open, and a man stepped halfway into the laundry room. He paused in the doorway, one hand still on the handle. He was maybe in his 40s, slim build, wearing dark green work clothes, the kind of uniform maintenance staff might wear. His hair was thinning on top, brown with flecks of gray. Nothing remarkable about him, really, except for how still he stood. And his eyes, they looked tired, ringed with shadows. "Sorry," I said, assuming he wanted to do laundry. "All the machines are in use right now. Should be done in about 30 minutes if you want to come back." He didn't speak, just nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room before landing back on me. Then he backed out, pulling the door closed behind him. Something about the interaction felt off, but I couldn't pin down why. Maybe it was how he never fully entered the room, or how he didn't say a word. I shrugged it off, probably just a socially awkward maintenance guy. The wash cycles finished, and I transferred everything to the dryers. Another 45 minutes passed uneventfully as I waited for our clothes to dry. By now it was nearly 9, and the laundry room felt increasingly isolated. The fluorescent light flickered more aggressively, creating moments of shadow. Outside, the wind had picked up again, making the building creak and moan. Finally, the dryers stopped. I grabbed our clothes and started folding them at the center table, eager to get back to our cozy cabin and Sophia. I worked quickly, not bothering to pair socks or fold things neatly, just getting everything back in the mesh bag so I could leave. When I finished, I hoisted the bag over my shoulder, turned toward the door, and nearly had a heart attack. The same man from earlier was standing in the corner by the door, just standing there, watching me. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps. He was simply there, as if he'd materialized out of nowhere. "Jesus!" I gasped, dropping the laundry bag. "You scared the hell out of me." He didn't respond, didn't smile or apologize or move. He just stared at me with those tired eyes. His posture was rigid, hands at his sides. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered above us. "Are you waiting to use the machines?" I asked, trying to sound normal despite my racing heart. "They're all free now." Still nothing, just that unwavering stare. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the damp night air. Something was wrong. People don't just stand silently in corners watching strangers. His stillness was unnatural. I bent down slowly to pick up my dropped laundry, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. When I straightened up again, he was gone. Not like he'd walked out. There had been no sound of the door, no footsteps. One moment he was there, the next, nothing. Just the empty corner where he'd been standing. I froze, bag clutched to my chest, eyes darting around the room. Had I imagined him? Was I more tired than I realized? I rushed to the door and yanked it open, half expecting to find him standing right outside. There was nobody there, just the empty path, wet from rain, dimly lit by the single bulb. I practically ran back to our cabin, splashing through puddles and not caring that my shoes and the bottom of the laundry bag were getting soaked. When I burst into our cabin, Sophia looked up from her book, startled. "Whoa, what happened to you? You look like you've seen a—" "Don't say it," I cut her off, dropping the bag and sinking onto the bed. My hands were shaking. I told her everything. The silent man, his disappearance, how wrong it all felt. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to skeptical. "Maybe he just slipped out while you were picking up the clothes," she suggested when I finished. "Or could have been someone playing a prank." "Sophia, there was no sound. None. And why would anyone prank a random tourist in a laundry room?" She didn't have an answer for that. We spent the rest of the night theorizing. Maybe he was another guest with social anxiety. Maybe I dozed off briefly without realizing it. Maybe the lighting played tricks on my eyes. None of it felt right, but eventually we went to bed. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, we packed up to continue our journey. As we were checking out, Sophia suddenly said to the manager, "By the way, my husband had a weird experience in your laundry room last night. Some creepy silent guy who disappeared into thin air. You've got a ghost, I think." She said it jokingly, clearly trying to lighten the mood. I expected the manager to laugh it off or look confused. Instead, his weathered face went completely still. The half-smile he'd been wearing dropped away. He looked at me intently. "So you saw Simon then?" he asked quietly. My blood ran cold. "What?" "Simon. Tall fellow, thinning hair, work clothes." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. The manager sighed, leaning forward on his elbows. "Simon was our maintenance man for about 15 years. Good worker, kept to himself mostly. Died suddenly about 10 years back. Heart attack in his sleep. His cabin was actually right next to the laundry building." Sophia had stopped smiling. She reached for my hand. "We get reports now and then," the manager continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Guests seeing him in the laundry, around the grounds, sometimes near his old cabin. Never does anything, just watches. Been happening since a few weeks after he passed." "You're serious," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "First time I saw him myself was about a month after the funeral. Thought I was losing it. But then others started mentioning him too. Guests, staff, always the same description." "And you're just okay with having a ghost on your property?" Sophia asked, her voice higher than usual. The manager shrugged. "Simon never bothers anyone. Figure he's just keeping an eye on the place. It was his home for a long time." We left shortly after, both of us silent as we pulled our camper van back onto the main road. What do you say after something like that? After having what you thought might be an overactive imagination, confirmed as a genuine paranormal encounter by someone who treated it like a normal fact of life. It's been 3 weeks now. We finished our honeymoon, flew home, settled back into our routine. But I can't stop thinking about Simon, about those tired eyes, watching me in the flickering fluorescent light, about how the manager didn't seem surprised or concerned, just matter-of-fact about a dead employee who still showed up for work a decade later. I've never believed in ghosts, always thought there were logical explanations for sightings and hauntings, tricks of light, overactive imaginations, misunderstandings. But now, I don't know what to believe anymore. What keeps me up at night isn't fear that Simon meant me harm. It's the realization that the boundary between our world and whatever comes after might be thinner than I ever imagined. That someone can die but still be present enough to watch a tourist fold laundry on a rainy night in New Zealand. Sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder in empty rooms, wondering if Simon was a one-off or if there are others, watching, waiting, standing silently in corners while we go about our lives, oblivious until we happen to look up at exactly the right moment.